Chapter 2181 Who is the traitor? The woman seemed to know what Han Sun was thinking. She smiled at Han Sun, but she did not say anything. Quietly, she continued eating her meal. Han Sun thought that the woman was definitely a suspicious character, but he could not be sure if she was the traitor of the destroyed or not. Han Sun thought of something, but a dragon man was already approaching his table. He sat down next to Han Sun, then looked at Zero and the rest of the girls. Marquise Han, I have heard that one of your female marquises used one arrow to almost completely obliterate Bar. That is a most impressive feat. I must wonder which of your companions were able to do such a thing? Could you tell me? When the dragon man spoke, the whole restaurant became deathly quiet. Everyone turned to look at their table. Han Sun looked at the dragon man with a quizzical expression. He had obviously been sent to verify and confirm the identity of Han Sun's companions. Han Sun wasn't surprised by this, but it was strange how a connection was drawn via the attack on Bar. When Bar heard the dragon man speak, he did not move. Obviously, Bar had to be afraid of the figure. If the man next to Han Sun was able to stay Bar's hand through fear, though, then he had to be someone of profound notoriety. Han Sun kept his gaze on the dragon man. This is my daughter Han Menger. Those two are my sisters. And this is Flower King's daughter from Narrow Moon. Her name is Qingli. As for this feather friend, I must admit I do not know her. Han Sun introduced the rest on his table, but he didn't mention Little Silver or Little Star. After the dragon man heard what he said, he turned his eyes to the feather woman. He looked at her and asked, "Where have you come from? What business brings you here?" The dragon man's behavior made Han Sun certain that the destroyed traitor was in fact a woman. Either that, or the traitor at least had the ability to present themselves as a woman. If this was not the case, then the dragon man would have been sure to ask for the identity of Little Silver and Little Star. His interest remained fixed on the women though. His sudden focus on the feather woman made it very obvious. Han Sun didn't think he was even bothering to hide it. The feather woman smiled and looked at the dragon man. I know of you, Dragon 6. Your title is Toxic Dragon Old 6. And while you are a dragon duke, I don't have to answer your questions. This place does not belong to the dragon. Toxic Dragon Old 6 froze. He looked at the feather woman and smiled. If you know who I am, then you must be aware of what I can do. You should spare yourself the trouble and cooperate. I would not like to destroy a woman. But that feather paid no mind to Toxic Dragon Old 6's threat. She smiled and said, If I am the person you are looking for, killing me wouldn't get you what you want. And if I am not the correct person, and you did kill me, you won't get what you want and people will become suspicious. They will think that perhaps you were the one that took it. I don't think there is any sound reason for you to kill me here. So why should I cooperate with you? I might be mistaken, of course. Are you cruel enough to slay me right here? If that is the case, then so be it. After that, the feather woman elegantly returned to eating her dish. She totally ignored the simmering anger of Toxic Dragon Old 6. The muscles in the dragon's jaw tightened, and he laughed darkly. I won't kill you. There are 10,000 ways to make you wish you were dead. That is what I am going to do to you. After that, Toxic Dragon Old 6's dragon hand clutched a dragon knife. He slowly moved to grab the woman's head. But the feather woman kept eating, as if she hadn't seen it coming. Either that, or she was willing to concede. She ignored Toxic Dragon Old 6's hand completely. Dragon 6, this is where you eat. This isn't where you shit. Even if she was the traitor of the destroyed, you should allow us, the destroyed, to do this ourselves. This is none of your business, a destroyed duke said coldly. When Dragon 6 heard that intrusion, his hand stilled. He looked at the destroyed duke and grinned. You want to get me mad and goad me into killing her, just so everyone turns their attention to me? Good idea. But I'm not that stupid. After that, Toxic Dragon Old 6 returned his gaze to the feather woman. He lowered his hand, got up, and returned to sit with the rest of the dragon. Han Sun was entertained. Whether or not the woman was the destroyed traitor, she was a powerful character. If she wasn't, she couldn't have remained so chill. Han Sun could see that Dragon 6 wasn't going to kill her right there. But she was very calm. And it only took her a few sentences to talk down suspicions of her identity. She made people uncertain of what to do with her. She seemed rather dangerous, but it brought an air of balance to her character. There were not many people that were able to do such a thing. There were too many suspicious things about her though. Even if she didn't say anything more, she was still attracting every eye in the establishment. But no one would do anything to her before they figured this out. There were too many factions present with too much at stake. I am full. I appreciate you allowing me to sit here. I believe we will meet again. The feather woman smiled at Han Sun. Then she got up and went upstairs. She was living there. Powerful woman. Might she really be the traitor? Qingli pursed her lips. Who knows? Maybe she is. Maybe she isn't. Han Sun looked around him, and he noticed all the other races were staring at them. That woman had established a connection between him and her. And because they were suspicious about her, the association made them suspicious about him and his own companions. After eating, Han Sun took his companions outside. He noticed that every elite was now gathered in Steel City. The whole town was locked down. You could only get in, and you could not get out. Apparently, the authorities believed that the traitor was indeed located somewhere in Steel City. That was a fairly sensible conclusion, or at least Han Sun thought so. The only place to hide on planet Sodi was in its Soul City, and finding the traitor amongst the hordes of marquises, there would be a very trying task. But Han Sun had to wonder why the traitor had selected planet Sodi, and he pondered what the traitor's escape plan might be. If the traitor was really there, the person might be very difficult to locate. Of course, it was only a matter of time. They would find the traitor, sooner or later. And if the traitor came here, she had to have been prepared. And if the traitor was prepared, then she had to have an escape plan. Han Sun could not think of a way in which he might manage that though. Han Sun was giving the matter a lot of thought, because he now wanted the destroyed Bible for himself. If he was able to find the traitor before everyone else, he could take it without anyone noticing. He could throw it back into the sanctuaries, and that way, no one would ever find it. It would remain hidden even if people thought he was the culprit. But right now, not even Han Sun knew who the traitor was. He did not know if the traitor had brought the destroyed Bible with them either. Chapter 2182 Messy Fight. The whole of Steel City was a chaotic mess. All the dukes and marquises had been gathered in the city, and the tension was electric. The different races all suspected one another, which led to many conflicts and brawls that served no purpose. Ultimately, the traitor stayed hidden. And above all, that meant Han Sun had no choice but to remain where he was. He was not allowed to leave. Although the rebate had been trying to negotiate, the destroyed were adamant about not permitting anyone to leave planet Sodi until the traitor was found. Those of the other races were not allowed to leave, and that included the rebate themselves. Han Sun believed there to be other individuals mixed up in this, people who were aiding the traitor in her escape. He thought much of the current chaos and anarchy was a deliberate concoction to help the true traitor get away. It was difficult to determine the truth of this though. There were no more leads or clues, so whether the traitor was alone or working with others was impossible to confirm. And that was the reason that all the races were suspicious of each other. The next day, after Han Sun left his room, the restaurant was jam-packed with elites again. This time, however, he was unable to find a seat. Just as he was going to take his meal back to his room, though, the feather woman from the day before called him over and said, "Why don't we sit together?" Han Sun glanced over at her empty table. Although others were keen to watch her, no one dared to actually sit next to her. Han Sun knew this was because she was a very suspicious individual. No one wanted to sit with her and risk drawing attention and trouble to themselves. Their fear was more about the other elites than the woman herself. Han Sun did not care about that though. He had already interacted with her the day before, so sitting with her again wouldn't make a difference. The suspicion wasn't going to rinse off that easily. Han Sun and his companions had just sat down when the Extreme King lady entered the restaurant. People did not know she was of the Extreme King, but her slap had made people afraid of her. The Extreme King woman, having just entered the establishment, was unable to find a seat for herself. So, she walked to the table she had used the day before. There were a few dragons sitting there that day though, and amongst them was Dragon 6. Everyone saw the woman approach Toxic Dragon Old 6, and everyone knew immediately that they'd be in for some mid-meal entertainment. The Extreme King marched right up to the table and informed them directly, "I will allow you guys the chance to leave now." No one expected that woman to be so brash. After all, no one spoke to Toxic Dragon Old Six like that. Everyone was very interested in seeing how he'd react to her. Toxic Dragon Old Six rolled his eyes, and then looked at the woman with flat eyes. "Why?" The woman did not speak. Instead, she just punched him. Toxic Dragon Old Six hummed. His fist suddenly glared with a green evil breaker power, and he lifted it against the woman's mighty fist. The two powers thrummed against each other. But because the two people hadn't released all their powers, they both pulled back before they created a restaurant-destroying explosion. It looked like a tie though, and neither of the two seemed willing to back off. But Toxic Dragon Old Six's eyes widened. He stood up and said, "Let's go." Then, he and his friends quickly left. He allowed the woman to occupy the table all by herself. Everyone watched in silence as the woman ordered her meal. No one could understand why Dragon Six had been so willing to back off and give her his table. This also raised a few suspicions in regards to the identity of the woman. Hansen knew that the woman hailed from Extreme King, so he knew why Dragon Six was so willing to walk away. And furthermore, Dragon Six had deliberately chosen that seat to test her. After that punch, Dragon Six seemed to fully acknowledge who she was. And so he relented. He knew he shouldn't bother her anymore. While Han-sun was still in thought, Bar lifted his bone knife and ran at Han-sun shouting, "You will die today, either in here or out there." Han-sun frowned. If Bar had come looking for him, that meant the man had found a way to resist the cold. Han-sun was not afraid of him, but he did find this a bit of a nuisance. Steel City was locked down, so it wasn't as if he could run away or escape. "Bar, do not be so cocky. This place belongs to the rebate." The rebate manager frowned. So, after Bar said that, he lost all of his patience. He lifted his knife toward Han-sun while a red and black light amassed on the blade. When he unleashed that strike, it was sure to slice the entire hotel in half. The entire lobby descended into chaos. Everyone in the knife light's path tried to run away. No one wanted to get involved with whatever was about to happen. Han-sun kept his seat though. He didn't move away, but he did draw a pistol and fire a shot at Bar. Bar looked murderous. The bone knife struck the incoming bullet though. The bullet was stopped, and Bar was saved from the gunshot. That knife light had been so strong, however, that the strike kept coming. It sliced through the lobby, causing enough instability in the building to bring the whole place crumbling down. Han-sun dodged Bar's knife light, and as he did, his pistols swept smoothly up to point at Bar. He began firing without reprieve. Bar was not very good when it came to defense. He didn't even bother defending himself, and so the bullets fell on him easily. The ice light of those bullets began to spread across him too. But this time, the ice light was unable to freeze him. A silver necklace with a gold jewel hung from Bar's neck. After the ice light exploded, the gold jewel on Bar's necklace began to glow with a lava-looking gold flame. It melted the icy force and kept it from doing anything. "A light fireseed necklace," someone screamed, recognizing the necklace Bar was now wearing. When Bar saw that the necklace worked, and that Han-sun's freezing power no longer posed a threat, he smiled. Then he looked at Han-sun with rage. He waved his knife and screamed, "I am going to eat you." Han-sun's heart jumped. He summoned his dragon wings, his dragon ear wings, and petrified his skin. He flapped his wings, and his red body teleported away from the incoming strike. Bar roared. He lifted his knife and ran after Han Senator. His eyes looked like they were on fire with the desire to kill Han Senator. The restaurant had been thrown into turmoil. No one knew who started this all, but everyone was now fighting. And as everyone fought against each other in a massive brawl, the hotel was rapidly reduced to splinters. No one knew where Toxic Dragon Old Six came from, but he was back, and he threw a punch towards the feather woman that was near Han Sr. The woman flapped her wings and avoided the strike though. Toxic Dragon Old Six was unable to catch up with her. It was possible that he deliberately didn't go after the feather woman, because Toxic Dragon Old Six seemed fine with allowing the green light, shrouding his fist, to come down towards Little Angel and the others. Little Angel and Zero were able to avoid the strike, but another few Xenogeneics came forward to attack them. Han Sun had stumbled outside to fight Bar, and he finally realized what was going on. People were suspicious of the girls around him, and they wanted to test out his companions. Han Sun couldn't believe it. Neither Han Menger, Little Angel, or Zero was the traitor they were looking for. But even so, it mattered little. If Han Sun's companions could be killed, that's all that mattered to the others. Somehow, they had just gained a horde of new enemies. Chapter 2183 Siege. Han Sun wanted to go back, but Bar was hounding him. He wasn't going to let Han Sun return to his friends. Toxic Dragon Old Six missed his attack, but he did not stop. He ran towards the Feather Woman, with a toxic light leaking from his fist. He really was like a toxic dragon. The Feather Woman kept dodging though. She maneuvered as gracefully as a dancer. She was just a marquise, and yet she was acquitting herself well against the Duke Dragon 6. He was unable to land a single blow on her. A few of the destroyed dukes were headed for Little Angel. They looked murderous and cruel, and it was clear that they planned to destroy her. As those attacks came down on Han Sen's group, a blue light suddenly shone from Han Menger. It shielded Little Angel, Zero, Little Silver and Little Star. Pang! The destroyed dukes hit the blue shield, but none of their attacks were able to do anything. She's using Han Sen's defense treasure. One of the destroyed dukes frowned. They knew Han Sen's shield was impervious to damage, even from something that was king class in power. So they knew right away that they'd be unable to hack their way through the shield. Good. If they have the defense treasure, then that means Han Sun has nothing to protect himself. We finally have an excuse for killing Han Sun. The destroyed duke that spoke looked cruel. He headed for Han Sun, who was leaping through the air, still engaged in combat with Bar. Stay back. He is mine. Bar shouted and swung his knife at the approaching dukes. Those destroyed dukes were almost struck by Bar. They all had to scramble and leap away, which left them angry and shocked. Bar, what are you doing? A destroyed duke shouted at Bar. I told you that he's mine, didn't I? Bar grunted as he moved in to attack Han Senator. Those destroyed dukes came to a standstill in midair, their faces turning green from Bar's rude refusal to accept their help. Ignore him. Find the traitor first, commanded a destroyed duke with hard eyes. Yes, Mr. Dear Robber. That group of destroyed dukes complied immediately, and so they all descended on the city and the women in it. The destroyed weren't the only ones doing this though. Everyone started to attack the women, who were of a different kind to themselves. They were all desperate to find the traitor. Just as Han Sun expected, everyone believed that the traitor was indeed a woman, but they did not know which race she belonged to, and so every woman became a target. Everyone started to attack without a second thought. It was absolute chaos in every direction. Their fight had cascaded until the entire city turned into a battleground. Fortunately, Han Menger and the others had the protection of the demon bug Bysema, so they were able to avoid being hit. There were no king-class elites around, so no one present could break the Bysema. The Feather Woman kept coming under attack by the furious Dragon 6, and everyone else had their eyes on her. She really did seem to be the most likely suspect. Bar attacked Han Sun in a fury. Han Sun relied on his dragon wings and break space flash to avoid him. He didn't attack Bar though. He did not want to risk making the crazy man any stronger. Ice no longer worked on Bar. Han Sun fired volley after volley, but it wouldn't freeze him. Spells' freezing powers would only work if they hit the enemy. But now, the necklace was keeping the ice from making contact every single time. The freezing powers weren't going to work. The light fireseed necklace is one of the deified treasures of the destroyed, right? I cannot believe the destroyed let Bar use it. How much do they want me dead? Han Sun chuckled darkly, then squinted at the necklace. Han Sun knew that the most famous treasures of the destroyed were the light fireseed necklace, the dark eye ring, and the chaos statue. Bar's neck looked to be adorned by that same light fireseed necklace. Life starts with fire, and it ends with fire. The legendary light fireseed necklace had the light of fire. It was one of the strongest fire element treasures, even possessing light powers. The legends said that a deified destroyed once owned that necklace. He used it to incinerate an entire system. It was quite a scary item, if the story was true. But Bar was only a duke. He could not use the might of the necklace in full. Even so, it was more than adequate to protect its bearer from any cold powers that came against him. Unless Han Sun was king class, there was no chance of him being able to freeze Bar this time. Han Sun flapped his wings. He flew 100 meters away and fired his gun, shooting a few of the destroyed dukes that were nearby. Pang! Pang! The explosive sounds were everywhere, and the destroyed dukes were reduced to ash. Han Sun moved quickly, and he evaded each and every one of Bar's attacks. He kept shooting at the destroyed as he went, raising their death toll higher and higher. Han Sun, fight me! Bar roared. But there was nothing he could do to stop Han. Senator Diarabber saw a duke get wasted by Han Sun, and it made him frown. Then he went after Han Sun with his fist raised. The male face that represented light started to glow resplendently. His fist was like an actual sun, holding a candescent godlight. Han Sun flapped his wings and disappeared. He avoided the punch and fired his gun at Diarabber. The female face of Diarabber represented darkness. She released a dark light. The 10 fingers were like daggers that shredded the hail of bullets Han Sun fired at them. The bullets exploded on contact, but the black power formed a bottomless black hole in the air that sucked in the bullets and swallowed their effects. They were removed from play. Diarabber! He is mine! Bar proclaimed angrily. Then kill him before I can, Diarabber said coldly. The bird face of the middle represented chaos, and it began to produce light. A turbulent power leaked out of him to cover a radius of 1,000 meters, and when Han Sun tried to use break space flash, he realized he was unable to teleport anymore. Bar roared. He swung his bone knife through another flurry of attacks to smite Han Senator. He didn't try to force Diarabber to leave, as he had all the other destroyed dukes. Diarabber was coming for Han Sun now too. The 6 arms released a trio of powers to damage Han Senator. Diarabber continually released a chaotic power into the air around him. Break space flash did not work anymore, so Han Sun was unable to teleport away to safety. Facing the attacks of 2 dukes, Han Sun was now at a disadvantage. Han Sun relied on his movements and speed, and he had to operate at max capacity to stay ahead. But even so, it ultimately insufficient to avoid the attacks of both Bar and Diarabber. If I was a duke, I wouldn't have to be afraid of fighting them. But I am just a marquise, and my power is far inferior to dukes like Diarabber. Han Sun thought about how he might deal with his current enemies. There were still things he wanted to gain from this situation. Traitor! She is the traitor! Suddenly, a deafening shout came from behind them. Everyone stopped to pay attention. Chapter 2180, For the Real Traitor. Everyone's attention was drawn to the shout. Even Han Sun's. The voice had come from Toxic Dragon Old 6. He was flecked with blood, and a black shape had been seared into his chest that looked like a woman's hand. The handprint had burned through Toxic Dragon Old 6's dragon scales, branding his chest with its black mark. Destroyed power! Someone shouted. Then everyone was jumping toward the feather woman. Even Diarabber abandoned his attack on Han Sun to deal with her. Aside from the destroyed, the only person that could use destroyed power to damage Dragon 6 in such a way had to be the destroyed traitor. Toxic Dragon Old 6 had kept pursuing that feather woman, and she had finally hurt him. Everyone was running for the feather woman now. Only Bar, who was completely obsessed with Han Sun, remained to finish what he had started. Han Sun felt glum about this, of course. But when Diarabber left, he took his disruptive powers with him. Han Sun could suddenly use break space flash again, thankfully. Han Sun moved fast, activating break space flash as he went. Before Bar caught up with him, Han Sun rushed into a building. When Bar ripped the building apart to locate Han Sun, he couldn't find him anywhere. Han Sun, get out here! Bar struck out furiously with his bone knife, reducing the building to smaller and smaller pieces. But he still couldn't find Han Senator. Han Sun wasn't in the mood to deal with the immortal madman. After Little Invisible cast a power on him, he became completely transparent. And furthermore, he used his Dongxian aura to mask his presence. Then he slipped out from under Bar's nose. Everyone was intent on hunting down the destroyed traitor now. Many scary powers were being hurled towards the feather woman, but the feather woman slipped by them with unbelievable grace. Despite being only a marquise, she was teleporting straight through the dukes and marquises hunting her. Even Dia Robber was unable to stop her. Dia Robber's bird head flashed. That same field of chaos was opened, and the woman fell into it. But shockingly, the woman's movement abilities weren't affected by the power. She could still teleport, and no one was able to do her any harm. You stupid people. Do you really think I am the destroyed traitor? Dragon 6 used that palm strike himself. He hit himself. It has nothing to do with me, the woman exclaimed after another successful evasion. Liar. Do you honestly expect us to believe that? A destroyed duke roared back. His desire to kill her was greater than ever. If I was the traitor, why would I make it so obvious? The woman smiled and spread her arms cockily. She did not dodge. Instead, she brought a light to the tip of her finger, and she aimed it at the destroyed duke. The destroyed duke moved his 6 arms and fired 3 separate powers. He used a tricolored godlight to counter her attack. But her godlight broke through the tricolored godlight. It branded the destroyed duke with a weird mark. The destroyed duke was suddenly turned into a miniature version of himself. His flesh and bones were all compressed and condensed together. The 3-meter-tall body was turned into little more than a sugar cube. A mark of the very high. You are of the very high. Everyone's faces went white. Those who had been going for the woman now stopped. They quickly began to scramble backward. Dia Robber seemed to realize something. He looked towards where Toxic Dragon Old 6 had been. But the dragon was nowhere to be seen. Where is Toxic Dragon Old 6? Dia Robber asked one of the other dragons. I don't know. He was here though. The dragons felt that something was very amiss. Now, all the races started to realize that the woman was associated with the very high. They knew of her marking ability. It was a very high skill. The very high certainly couldn't have been the traitor. But Toxic Dragon Old 6 had definitely been hit by a destroyed power. If the power hadn't come from the woman, then he really must have used it on himself. Toxic Dragon Old 6 was a dragon though. He couldn't have used a destroyed power on his own, which meant he had to have been the traitor. He had stolen the destroyed Bible. But now he was gone. He had vanished amidst the chaos, and no one knew where he had gone. Perhaps he had even fled Steel City. Dia Robber looked at the feather woman and bowed. Excuse our most impolite rudeness. We will issue a proper and formal apology at a later date. Can you please tell us which direction the traitor went? The fake Toxic Dragon Old 6 had framed her. She must have seen where he went. When you guys attacked me, he escaped that way. The woman coldly pointed towards the Steel City gate. Without a moment of hesitation, everyone ran in that direction. He had left a trail as he ran, and they tracked him into some mountains. The woman watched impassively as everyone left. They wanted to find the traitor, but they also wanted to escape her wrath with all haste. The thought that they had all attacked one of the very high had given them massive chills. They sincerely hoped she'd be forgiving. The woman did not seek revenge though. Instead, she flew up into the skies. What happened in Steel City was watched by the ships. They saw when the woman revealed herself as one of the very high. And so no one stopped her from leaving planet Sodi. The universe's #1 race. The mysterious very high. They were the strongest and most mysterious race. Even the extreme king and ancient god races were afraid of them. When the very high mark appeared, bad things tended to follow. This had happened many times through the ages, and many races had been destroyed by the very high, wiped from the annals of history. Dia Robber and his followers searched the mountains up and down, and eventually, they found the fake Dragon 6 and engaged him. Are you guys blind? Why would I be the traitor? Don't you know that the fox race is only comprised of women? They become weaker if they turn into males. Do I look like a fucking woman? Toxic Dragon Old 6 shouted as he fought back. Dia Robber saw that the man's toxic dragon evil breaker powers were real. As he fought, he asked, "What are you doing then? Why are you running if you aren't the traitor?" "I'm not running. I'm fucking injured, and I'm looking for a place to heal." Toxic Dragon Old 6 shouted angrily. "You say you are Toxic Dragon Old 6, yes? How can you prove your identity?" Khan asked. Something seemed wrong about this whole situation. Toxic Dragon Old 6's body then seemed to turn inside out. His body was covered with toxic scales, and he looked like a humanoid but toxic dragon. He breathed out toxic gas and said, "No matter how strong a fox lady might be, she wouldn't be able to imitate a xenogenic toxic dragon body." Oh no! The robber looked horrified. When he returned to Steel City, the very high woman was gone. Chapter 2185. Taking the Bible. A small business ship was flying through the expanse of space, following a designated route. Suddenly, the crew saw a woman approaching their vessel. The ship came to a stop and opened its doors to let her in. The woman quickly entered the ship, and not long after, she was given a private room. Inside that room, the feather woman began to change her form. Her feather features started to fade away. A white tail grew from her backside, and her body became curvier than ever. Her face underwent a change too, becoming sharp and refined. The beautiful woman then pulled a cubic object out of her pocket. It was the very high mark that had manifested when she made it look like she had condensed a destroyed. The woman threw the very high mark on the floor, and the very high mark started to shake. It rattled around for a while until a pang noise sounded. A fox-like woman with fox ears emerged. She looked exactly the same as the other beautiful woman, save for the fact that she was quite a bit younger. The fox woman scratched her bum, and then got up. She snickered happily. "Sister, we made it. We managed to fool all of those people." If Dear Robber had been there, he would have been very angry. Killing the destroyed Duke with a very high mark had been merely a ruse. The shape-shifting foxes had outwitted everyone with their illusions. It was a shame that the king-class elites had been stuck outside the 6-star xenogenic space. If they had been able to observe the fox's tricks with their own eyes, they'd have known what was up. But the king-class elites were forced to watch from a distance. The two Fox sisters had counted on that, putting on a show that would only fool dukes and marquises. "I told you, all those races might pretend to be tough shit around us, but they grovel like worms before the very high." Seeing the very high mark nearly scared them to death. They didn't dare stay long enough to find out the truth. Big Sister Bai Lin smiled. Little Sister Bai Fu pulled out her pink tongue and said, "Luckily, those guys were restricting each other, and thought it best not to allow the king-class sorts to enter the 6-star xenogenic space. Had this not been the case, we wouldn't have been able to fool them. So, what do we do next? Let's become IPO. We can head to planet IPO. Then visit the dragon after that." Bai Lin trailed off and her eyes widened. There was a punch headed for them. It shot their way like a laser, destroying the ship in the process. White light covered the two sisters as they escaped from the ship. A proud-looking woman hovered in space near the wreckage, looking at them coldly. When the Fox sisters saw the woman, they looked even more frightened. It was the powerful woman they had seen inside the Steel City restaurant. They had never expected that the woman would manage to escape the lockdown planet, pursue them, and catch up with them before they got too far away from the system. "Give me the destroyed Bible," the woman said flatly, staring at the sisters. "I don't have a clue what you are talking about. How could we have the destroyed Bible?" Bai Lin laughed. The woman's expression did not change. She just remained where she was, staring at them. Slowly she said, "You and Toxic Dragon Old 6 performed well. But now I've caught you, and I won't allow you to deliver the destroyed Bible to the dragon. I will give you one last chance to hand it over." That woman then raised her fist. An overbearing power began to gather around it. "You are strong, but you are alone. There's no guarantee you can catch up with us either." Bai Lin frowned. "Why don't you test that theory?" The woman launched her fist right at Bai Lin. Bai Lin and Bai Fu moved, and their bodies seemed to disappear in the black of space. They soon realized that no matter how they attempted to evade that strike, they wouldn't be able to escape the punch. It was as if the woman's fist was coming from every direction at once. They were locked in, and while they could often survive dangerous situations by changing their race to hide in plain sight, that skill wouldn't help them in this situation. This punch wasn't something they could avoid. Pang! Bai Lin and Bai Fu amassed and combined their power to fight back against that incoming punch, but they both ended up being hit. They were launched through space, with trails of blood drifting away from them. They crashed into an asteroid, and the asteroid broke into fragments. Their amazing talents had allowed them to survive many attacks from a wide array of dukes, But they weren't dukes themselves. They had the power of marquises. Bai Lin recovered from the blow and gritted her teeth. Her chest began to flicker with the formation of black light. The black light swept down to her fist, and she flashed forward to punch the enigmatic woman. If the destroyed had been there, they would have identified the black light as a power of the destroyed Bible. No one could have guessed how Bai Lin was using her shape-shifting to cast the destroyed Bible's power though. Pang! Despite the power of her attack, Bai Lin was sent flying away again. She curled slightly in pain after using the Bible, and her expression seemed stunned. Did you just throw an extreme king punch? The woman was not inclined to answer, and so she raised her fist once more. Bai Lin clenched her jaw again, then coughed from deep in her chest. She spat out a black light, which floated through space near her enemy. That's for you, Bai Lin sneered. She started pulling Bai Fu away from the area. Let's go. The extreme king woman frowned as the two flew off. Their power was only average, but they were very quick. The extreme king woman seemed hesitant, but she moved over to examine the black light. The black light before her was actually a black stone book. It looked old, and the cover was adorned with a triangular symbol. There was nothing else remarkable about it. It was crude and worn, and it looked like the work of an older race. Most people wouldn't have known that the old stone book was actually the prestigious destroyed Bible. The extreme king woman knew what the object was the moment she saw it though. Although her race was one of the most important and powerful in the universe, the extreme king's resources were actually quite limited. Deified treasures like the destroyed Bible were difficult to come by. Securing the destroyed Bible was the woman's first priority. After that, she would go and finish off the two Fox sisters. The woman had almost touched the destroyed Bible when she stopped. She frowned and looked at the Bible. It wasn't actually floating in space as she had originally thought. Come out! The woman stared at the Bible coldly. In response to her shout, a shadow appeared right next to the Bible. Then a gold-armored hand reached out and grabbed the book. Chapter 2186 A Punch and a Punch Dollar. The woman recognized the person hovering in front of her. The extreme king were quite full of themselves. And since they always thought themselves superior to others, they didn't participate in the Geno being scroll. They did, however, keenly watch the fights that unfolded there. That was especially true of the Marquis' fights. The woman had watched each and every one of them. She recognized the gold armor Han Sun was wearing. I will be keeping this. You can go now, Han Sun stated, turning the destroyed Bible over in his hands. He had used Little Invisible to hide himself, so he could follow Bai Lin, but he had waited until now to make a move. He hadn't wanted to take action while they were inside 6-star xenogenic space, but as he followed the Fox sisters, he noticed the extreme king woman was pursuing them as well. This would probably be his best opportunity to steal the destroyed Bible, while pinning the crime on the extreme king woman. Since the Fox sisters had made their escape, everyone would soon learn that the destroyed Bible had been stolen by the extreme king. No one would believe that someone had actually confronted one of the extreme king and stolen it back. So Han Sun would likely be safe from accusations. Even if people believed that Dollar ultimately claimed it, that wouldn't matter. No one had a clue who Dollar really was. So Han Sun was safe. He originally planned to launch a sneak attack, but the woman had discovered his presence before he had the chance to. That surprised him. In the eyes of the extreme king, achieving first place in the Marquis' Geno being scroll is nothing more than a joke, the woman said cockily, with a snarky tilt of her head. With no hesitation, she threw a punch towards Han's senator. The incoming strike was far harder than the one he had seen before. The space around him seemed to get compressed by the overwhelming force of that punch. Space-time itself looked like it was going to freeze and shatter. Although she pretended that Dollar was beneath her notice, after seeing Dollar fighting Evil Eye and Lone Bamboo, she knew he wasn't a foe to be underestimated. She was well aware that he would be a difficult foe, so she poured all of her strength and power into that punch. Seeing the woman's punch coming for him, Han Sun used Super Spank with his left hand. Pang! When their fists collided, the force of the extreme king's punch disintegrated into little more than dust and echoes. The woman's face paled, and she retreated with haste. But it was still too late. Her gauntlet had shattered, and the disintegrating power continued up into the rest of her armor. All she wore was turned to dust. She was left completely naked. The Extreme King woman's implacable face heated with embarrassment. She summoned another set of armor to clothe herself, but by the time she turned back to look for her opponent, Dollar was gone. Dollar, I'm going to kill you. The Extreme King woman was very angry, and her teeth gnashed. Try as she might, though, she was not going to find Dollar that day. Han Sun had returned the punch he was owed. She had sent Han Sun sprawling on Planet Blade, and he had destroyed her armor. He was only getting what he was due. They were even now. Han Sun headed to the 6-star xenogenic space. He needed to return and let everyone know that the real Han Sun was still there. That way, he could eventually leave without raising any more suspicions. And in regards to the Extreme King woman, he had no interest in killing her. He headed back to the 6-star system immediately to avoid wasting any more time with her. After all, as long as she was left alive, Han Sun could frame her for the theft. If she was killed, that would be more difficult. The Destroyed wouldn't be the only ones investigating her death. The rest of the Extreme King would also want to know what had happened. Having them descend on the investigation would be bad. Han Sun returned to 6-star xenogenic space and met up with Little Angel. All of the races participating in the search had confirmed that the escaped woman was a shape-shifting fox. There was still hope, however. The lockdown on the 6-star xenogenic space was yet to be lifted, so kings finally went in to look around for themselves. But they quickly came to the conclusion that the shape-shifting fox had managed to escape successfully. 2 days later, when all was done, the lockdown on the 6-star xenogenic space was lifted. Han Sun then took his companions back to Narrow Moon. In the base on Planet Eclipse, in a secret room, Han Sun happily ran his finger along the spine of the destroyed Bible. A deified treasure. That was a pretty good gain. After a while, though, Han Sun's joy turned to frustration. No matter what he tried, he couldn't unlock the Bible or make use of its power. Han Sun combined his light and dark powers, but even so, he made no progress in casting the powers of the Bible. Han Sun couldn't even open the damned book or get a glimpse of its contents. Han Sun tried a myriad of different elements, but nothing seemed to work. So, Han Sun used his Dongxian aura and Purple Eye Butterfly to inspect the Bible. After a time of careful observation, Han Sun noticed that it was actually created through a combination of light, dark, and chaos powers. Genes are insufficient, cannot absorb deified gene. Han Sun kept hearing that announcement, telling him he was unable to absorb it. The destroyed Bible was a deified xenogenic gene, so he couldn't absorb it since he was still just a marquise. It was the same as with the sun gold bird. I can't eat it, and neither can I make use of it. It's useless in my hands, even though it is deified. Unless I make it up to the class of deified, it can only be cast with light, dark, and chaos powers. Light and dark powers are already hard enough to simulate, and I can't simulate chaos powers at all. Unless I learn all three and combine them well, I won't be able to tap into its power. After thinking about it for a while, Han Sun decided to give it up. Han Menger pushed open the secret door and stuck her head in, then pointed at the book. Father, can I have this book? You want to have a look? Han Sun turned to Han Menger with some surprise. She had never asked for anything before. Han Menger nodded. She looked at the destroyed Bible and said, "That book seems to resonate with a power that is familiar to me somehow." Han Sun handed Han Menger the destroyed Bible and thought to himself, "It is possible, I suppose. Menger's blood is complicated, but I do remember the sacred leader possessing a light power. Her mother had the power of death, and my blood." As Han Sun mulled all of this over, Han Menger took the destroyed Bible. The book had shown no response while Han Sun held it, but it suddenly caught fire when she touched it. Flames wreathed the stone book, then spread to consume Han Menger's entire body. 3 different lights began to shine from the stone book's triangle. The white was light power, the black was dark power, and the gray was clearly chaos power. Each color correlated with a specific element. Chapter 2187, Watching the Destroyed Inheritance. The 3 lights of the triangle merged to become a swirling gray color. When you looked at the symbol from one side, the gray color shifted to black, and if you looked from the other side, the gray turned white. The triangle seemed to pulse with that mystic gray. The color stained Han Minger's power gray as well. Han Sun could sense a frightening presence radiating from the power, and it seemed as if all that energy was going to explode. Han Minger held the Bible comfortably in one hand, as if she hadn't noticed any of the power surging around her. Her other hand flicked through the Bible's pages. From what Han Sun could see, there were many images and sections of text within. It was like he was watching a 3D movie flicker past on the pages. Although Han Sun couldn't open the book himself, he had no trouble seeing the book's content now that someone else had opened it. The images were so impressive that they made Han Sun feel like he was watching a supernova. The universe began. The universe was destroyed. Life was started. Life was ended. Born from the destroyed. Live for the destroyed. Survival is the destroyed. Han Sun examined the first line of the destroyed Bible. The destroyed Bible was a deified treasure, a holy book of the destroyed race. It recorded the practices of their alphas' geno arts, his experiences, and the understandings he had come to throughout his entire lifetime. As Han Sun read the destroyed Bible, it was like he could hear the destroyed alpha explaining geno arts. He could see the true meaning of it all. Han Sun was delighted. Destroyed geno arts required the user to possess all three powers, but Han Sun did not have chaos power. Because of this, he lacked the ability to cast destroyed powers. But the destroyed alpha's explanations clarified a whole host of things and filled Han Sun with inspiration. He was able to understand Break Six Skies much more deeply because of it. The destroyed were a part of the Break Skies, and they even claimed to be the royalty of that ancient race. No matter what the case might have been, the geno arts the destroyed alpha left behind had a connection with Break Six Skies. The things Han Sun had learned from the destroyed geno arts gave him a vat of additional knowledge that he could apply to Break Six Skies. Han Sun had been stuck in the first tier of Break Six Skies. Now he was able to understand more. Proficiency with the geno art allowed access to the second tier. And as he learned more, he would be able to keep climbing. Break Six Skies was not a technique that could be practiced to gain greater strength. It forced a student to teach themselves to utilize their powers more effectively. However, progressing with the art required a lot of understanding and knowledge. As he studied Break Six Skies, Han Sun sometimes felt like an ancient swordsman, trying to understand how bombs were made. The geno art required understanding rather than raw strength. If a student understood how the geno art's powers worked, then they could control the power and unleash its full potential. And that was more than enough. Whether the practitioner was a baron or a deified elite, they could still access all tiers of Break Six Skies. The level of power output would be the only difference between the skill being used by someone weak and someone strong. The techniques themselves would remain unchanged. Low-level nobles did not really understand that power though. It was difficult for them to make use of Break Six Skies. Han Sun was still in the beginning phases of learning these techniques. Or at least he had been. By reading the destroyed Bible, he was able to understand more about how its power worked. Break Six Skies improved greatly in a short amount of time. By merely watching as Han Minger flipped through the destroyed Bible, Han Sun's Break Six Skies was able to progress and reach the third tier. As the content of the destroyed Bible was revealed, the gray power seeped into Han Minger's body. She stared at the destroyed Bible with an unreadable expression. The destroyed Bible began to morph in her hands. Not long after, the destroyed Bible had transformed into a gray arrow. The gray destroyed power sank into her hands and subsided. If Han Sun hadn't actually watched it happen, he never would have believed that the stone arrow she now possessed was actually the destroyed Bible. He couldn't detect even a trace of destroyed power radiating from it. Han Minger lifted the destroyed Bible and looked at Han Senior. Father, thank you very much for this arrow. Oh, I'm glad you like it, Han Sun stumbled. Luckily, Han Minger was rather naive, so she didn't notice his awkwardness over the whole affair. Han Sun was on the third tier of Break Six Skies, and as he realized that, he quickly tried to recall everything he had seen from the destroyed Bible. If he had any more breakthroughs, that would be the greatest reward. Aside from Super Spank, Break Six Skies was the strongest Geno art Han Sun had in his arsenal. When he wasn't using his dollar identity, Break Six Skies was effective enough as a killing power to be depended on. It was a shame that Break Six Skies was so powerful though. If he used it in close-quarter combat, there was every chance he could blow himself up. It was fortunate that Spell provided him with 3 different weapons. Their range meant that they were the perfect tools to pair with Break Six Skies. Menger, stay with me for a little while. I have a Geno art I would like to teach you. If Han Sun could teach her Break Six Skies, then she could have those destructive powers as well. Although many problems could not be solved through violence, they still needed to be able to unleash violence and overwhelm any force that happened to be aimed at them. So Han Sun spent some time teaching his daughter. When he was done, he went to Cold Palace to accept the benefits of being the guardian. Jadeskin leveled up quickly. It would definitely reach Duke in 2 years. It was difficult to level up any Geno art from Marquise to Duke. Even if there was an abundance of resources available, it would still take a while. Higher races could usually become dukes within the space often years. If a race was of poor quality, though, they could end up taking an entire century. Han Sun was only progressing so quickly because he could absorb the deified toad's force of ice. Such an opportunity was extremely rare. Han Sun wasn't too worried about his Jadeskin, but he was concerned about how things would go with the story of genes. There were no special resources for him to consume, so all he could do was slowly practice it by himself. And despite his efforts, he couldn't feel the story of genes improving. Han Sun paid attention to what happened after the destroyed Bible incident. And just as he thought, the searching races eventually found those shape-shifting foxes and confirmed that the destroyed Bible had been taken by one of the Extreme King. After learning that, no one dared to continue the investigation. Even the destroyed weren't brave enough to ask the Extreme King for the Bible. Han Sun thought there might be some trouble, but the entire matter just came to an end. It was as if the destroyed came to terms with the loss of their deified artifact. And that was that. It looks like I underestimated the effect the Extreme King have on people. They don't even dare bark. Han Sun rolled his eyes. It looked like that unlucky Extreme King woman had become the perfect scapegoat for the affair. But Han Sun knew he had to be extra careful to avoid giving the Extreme King any hint that Han Sun was actually dollar. Chapter 2188 Dive Heart Practice. A year passed. Over the course of that year, Han Sun spent a lot of time practicing Jadeskin. He wanted to get that up to the rank of Duke first and foremost. At that point, he would be able to absorb Duke genes. With 100 Duke genes for a base, he'd be able to level up his other Geno arts a little faster. As the year went by, Han Sun also came up with excuses to enlist more companions from the sanctuaries. From the humans, he brought over Ningyu, Lin Feng, Tang Jinliu, Qin Xian, Huang Fujing, Ji Qing, and Han Yan. There were also many super creatures and spirits that made the jump. Planet Eclipse did not have much in the way of high-class resources, but there were many xenogeneics. After he brought people to the Geno universe, raising them to Marquise was fairly easy. Everyone's super god body was different, so Han Sun's personal experience might not translate well to each of them. They all had to discover their own paths. Han Sun only gave them the opportunity to do so. Han Sun brought such large numbers of people because he knew how powerful the many races were. There was a multitude of powerful forces in the Geno universe. Groups such as Sky Palace, the Dragon, and the Destroyed were not to be taken lightly. They were all very strong factions. Even the deified Kong Fei had to pay a high price to knock the Feathers down a few pegs, and they weren't even in the top 100. The Feathers didn't have anyone deified either. Han Sun would require as many elites as he could enlist if he wished to light his own lantern in the future. There was no doubting their loyalties either. In the alliance they were all allies, and Han Sun knew them personally. Even the spirits and creatures he brought over wouldn't want to sell out humans. Even so, Han Sun took a few precautionary measures, so that, in the event someone actually did try to betray him, he could deal with the situation quickly. Han Sun's sister Han Yin was very talented. She was like Han Sun in many ways, but the development of her powers was still quite different. That was because she practiced with the falsified Sky Sutra and the Azura Sutra. She was on a different path than he was. Han Sen knew her super god body was called King Release Sky. It was different from Han Sen's own Super King Spirit body. Not many people had the same super god body as each other. People practiced differently than one another based on their super god bodies. Some of the differences were obvious, and some might take years to be revealed. Super god bodies were usually secret though, and Han Sen only asked Han Yin about hers, because she was his sister. He hadn't asked for the names or details of anyone else's body. Every human he brought over was a genius of their race though. With their super god bodies, their talents wouldn't be far off those of the higher races. That meant they would gain rank quickly. With the resources available on Planet Eclipse, many of the people he had brought over managed to reach the rank of Earl within that single year. Aside from Ji Qing and Han Yen, the others were keen to explore and see more of what lay beyond that entry point to the Geno universe. And this was something Han Sen agreed to. They all wanted different things for their lives, and it wasn't as if they needed to be babysat. Planet Eclipse was only going to limit their development. They would have to explore and obtain their own resources, if they really wished to grow. Han Sen didn't want to allow Han Yin to explore, however. She repeatedly asked him to let her travel, but he kept preventing her from leaving. If something happened to her, his parents would murder him. But Han Yin wasn't the sort to give up easily, and eventually, Han Sen conceded and said he'd give her a recommendation at Sky Palace. She agreed to that happily enough at least. Ji Qing was Ji Yinran's cousin. By extension, she was Han Sen's little cousin-in-law. And the Ji family had focused quite a bit of their time and attention on her. Ji Yinran told him to take good care of her, as well, and not permit her to take any unnecessary risks. Fortunately, Ji Qing wasn't too keen on the prospect of exploring. When Han Sen brought up the subject, she smiled at him. I have to stay next to you and keep an eye on you for Yinran. Otherwise, who knows what you'll get up to, all alone here in this Geno universe. If it was something bad, I'd feel bad for Yinran. I have Bauer as a spy. Why would I dare to do anything inappropriate? Han Sen touched Bauer's face. You wouldn't dare? That must mean you thought about it. But you didn't. Ji Qing smiled at Han. Senator Han Sen shrugged his shoulders. You'll be here, and you can't go back. Even if I have such thoughts, you won't be able to tell her. Ji Qing looked surprised and Han Sen left. Han Sen went to Cold Palace. By guarding the door, he was able to watch the tadpoles slowly become little toads. They absorbed the powers of the moons released by the deified toad, which made Han Sen quite jealous. The deified toad could use its power to produce moons to level up its babies, but Han Sen couldn't. Little Angel and Little Silver were already marquises. If they were unable to locate high-class resources, it would be much harder for them to level up. In the Geno universe, if you were not king class, you weren't really considered strong. That was why Shi Qing King and Ningyu went exploring often. King class elites were the true powers of the Geno universe. As the moonlight shone down on the baby toads, Han Sen put down the Cold Palace Guardian tablet and left the stone porch so he could soak in the power of the moonlight and the ice. After a year of absorbing icy powers and refining moonlight, Jadeskin might not have reached Duke, but he did understand a lot more about the ice powers and the moon powers. He was also more familiar with the deified toad's strength now. Even without the protection of the Cold Palace Guardian tablet, Han Sen wasn't frozen by the deified toad's cold powers anymore. It was very cold, of course, but he could endure it. Ordinary marquises and dukes couldn't have withstood that level of cold. Han Sen absorbed much of the deified toad's ice powers and moon powers over time, and that was how he was able to build up his resistance to the ice. His body was very strong, and his jade skin power was connected to the deified toad. They were very closely aligned. The deified toad spat out a moon atop the waterfall, and then looked at Han Senator. Its sudden attention made Han Sen jump. But the toad did not look hostile. In fact, it looked surprised. After a while, the toad turned around and continued spitting out moon powers. The toad didn't seem to mind his presence, and that made Han Sen happy. He walked closer to the waterfall. He did not follow the little toads up it, but even that proximity was enough for him to absorb more moon powers and cold powers. The deified toad showed no desire to kick Han Sun away either. And when the moon powers were gone, the deified toad took the little toads down to the pool. The little toads left the water and went up the banks, and then they all proceeded to enter the cave in the side of the stone house. They saw Han Sun standing off to the side. Perhaps it was because he did not have the guardian tablet, but the little toads sensed him and approached him. Chapter 2189 Bad news. The little toads gathered around him, and they seemed to think he was one of them. The thought made Han Sun's heart sink though, and he found himself thinking, I'm not some dirty toad. After that day, Han Sun continued coming back to absorb cold and moon powers twice every month. He didn't need the cold palace guardian tablet anymore, and the big toad allowed him to follow the toad family to the waterfall. He was able to absorb the moon powers, right next to the deified toad. Han Sun's jade skin grew stronger far faster. Han Sun initially thought it might need another year to reach Duke rank, but it was on the precipice of that change already. He believed that if he continued this steady absorption of cold and moon powers, he'd make it to Duke in 3 months. When jade skin did become Duke, though, he'd have to track down a source of high-quality resources for himself. He couldn't rely solely on Planet Eclipse. It was a good place for early practice, but he couldn't develop fully if he remained stuck there. On that 15th of the month, when Han Sun was done guarding the door, he planned to leave Planet Blade and return to Planet Eclipse. But when he reached Isha's palace, 2 rebate butlers approached, alongside Snowbird Duke. Read latest chapters at Ellis novel. Calm Han Sun, Moonwheel King is looking for you. Please follow us to Full Moon Hall, said a butler, his face expressionless. Why is Moonwheel King looking for me? Han Sun asked with a frown. Full Moon Palace was a place to hold discussions. Only the kings of Narrow Moon were allowed to debate there. It was very rare for Moonwheel King to summon a marquise for an audience in Full Moon Hall. You will know when you get there, won't you? Another butler said coldly. Han Sun looked at Snowbird Duke. She was behaving strangely, holding herself a little more rigidly than usual. He did not say anything, but he just nodded to her. Moonwheel King, and the other kings are waiting for you. Let's go, the butler told him, apparently in a rush. Han Sun followed them to Full Moon Hall. On the ship there, Han Sun got to thinking, something bad must have happened to Isha. Otherwise, there's no way I'd be called to the Full Moon office. If something has happened to her, then my days here will be over. Things might be coming to an end. Han Sun knew that the only other person of rank in Narrow Moon who liked him was Black Moon King. The other kings were not very keen on him, despite being Isha's student. After all, Han Sun was not one of the rebate, and he had consumed many of their resources. He was just fortunate that the rebate didn't flat out hate him. If Han Sun had been able to practice really quickly, perhaps the kings would have viewed him differently. However, leveling up took Han Sun an excruciatingly long time. They did not think Han Sun would ever reach king, let alone become deified. This was one of the primary reasons they didn't think too highly of him. To them, his guardianship was just another example of his deficiency. If the post had been given to another talented marquise, that person would definitely have become a duke after so much time. No change had been observed with Han Sun though. No change for him meant no gain for them. Han Sun was backed by Isha, but if she was gone, then the rebate wouldn't waste more resources on an outsider like him. Read latest chapters at Ellis novel. Calm, the rebate is too small of a faction. It is a higher race that used to be a slave race. They aren't selfless either. Only Isha was willing to help me. What a shame this is. Han Sun vented silently. He knew what was going to happen on this trip. When Han Sun reached the Full Moon office, everyone was sitting around a large table within. Almost all of the Narrow Moon kings were present. Moonwheel King was in the middle. Black Moon King, Shadow King, Flower King, Night River King, and the other kings sat next to him. The table resembled a half moon, and as Han Sun walked in, they all turned their attention to him. Greetings to all the kings. After Han Sun bowed to each of them, he stood where he was without displaying any emotions. Moonwheel King sighed and told Han Sun, yesterday, the Extreme King delivered some news to us. Your teacher, on her venture into the chaos system, was killed. Not even her bones remain. We are going to build a mausoleum in her honor. You were her only student, and so there are many things we must now do together. I will do whatever I am able to. May I ask how my master was killed?" Han Sun bowed, feeling very strange about this. In truth, Isha was Han Sen's enemy. He had only become her student as a pretense, and Isha seemed to have accepted him as a student for reasons of her own, not because she was being altruistic. But in all the time they had spent together, Isha had treated him nicely. She had provided him with many opportunities. Without those opportunities, he might have spent 10 years wandering around, and he wouldn't have achieved half of what he had right now. So his feelings towards Isha were very conflicted. Hearing she had died, an odd pang rolled through him. He didn't really know what he was feeling. According to the Extreme King Ambassador, she joined the siege against a deified Xenogeniac. She was swallowed by it, and so nothing of her remains, Moon Will King said with a sigh. Moon Will King's sigh was not fake. It wouldn't be easy for the rebate to raise a half-deified warrior. And Isha had been their best hope of gaining a fully deified rebate. Losing Isha was a big blow to their race. If Isha had not gone to the Extreme King, though, she wouldn't have been able to become deified by herself. If she remained in Narrow Moon, she'd have been half-deified forever. For someone like Isha, stopping there would have been worse than death. Han Sun stayed silent after hearing about her death. Being killed by a deified Xenogeniac, without so much as a bone being left behind, was something of a clean way to go out. That was very much like her own style. When Moon Will King lapsed into silence, Night River spoke. "After sorting out Knife Queen's mausoleum, there will still be some things I will need you to do. You are her only student, so there are some legacy matters and items you will have to take over. I will confirm them and later give them to you." Han Sen knew that this was the primary point. He didn't know how much of a legacy the rebate would be willing to leave him with. Han Sun was afraid he wouldn't have a say in these matters. Night River King surely didn't want to give him anything, and it was definitely going to be a one-sided decision. Han Sun had expected this though, so he didn't say anything. He listened to what he was told, and then he left Full Moon office. He went to sort out her funeral arrangements. The Extreme King have sent the reward she was owed for the fight. "It should be given to Han Sun," Black Moon King said. But before he could finish, Night River King interrupted him. "Han Sun isn't one of the rebate, have you forgotten? He isn't qualified to accept it. We have discussed this already. Say no more," Night River King said firmly. Chapter 2190 Taking the Legacy. Isha had been a very special person to the rebate, so there was no need to worry about the funeral too much. Narrow Moon performed the services very well, and all Han Sun had to do was cooperate with their rituals. Isha's death impacted the rebate a great deal. It affected them deeply, in a variety of ways. As one of the two highest-ranked individuals of the rebate, Isha's death made them far weaker. It also altered the distribution of benefits and resources that various important rebate received. Due to these changes, the biggest negative ended up impacting Isha's student Han Senator. When Han Sun went to Night River King to confirm what of Isha's legacy would be left to him, he found himself frowning continually. Night River King provided Han Sun with a list, and there were very few items on that roster with any actual value. Furthermore, Isha's home planet of Planet Blade was taken by the elders. Han Sun was only allowed to claim Isha's personal items and belongings. Having expected this treatment, though, Han Sun was prepared to accept the verdict in silence. Now that Isha was gone, Han Sun was back to being a proper outsider, and the rebate wouldn't be willing to give anything of theirs to someone like him. Knife was the Cold Palace Guardian, but you replaced her. And now that she is dead, it is down to us to select a new guardian for Cold Palace. A real one. Thanks for your help in the meantime, but you can now give us back the tablet. And this is the list featuring all her legacy items you may claim. You will need to sign it," Night River King said coldly. Peering right at Han Senator, Night River King wanted the Cold Palace Guardian's position. This time, things were going more his way. He would indeed become the guardian in Han Sen's stead. Han Sun met Night River King's eyes and held out the guardian tablet. Night River King stared at the guardian tablet as it was passed toward him, and his eyes sparkled. The Geno art he practiced was aligned quite well with the boons that the deified toad could impart. He'd be able to use the ice and moon powers of the deified toad to become half-deified in only a few centuries. I can give you the tablet, and I will sign the form as you asked, but I have one request to make. Han Sun did not pass the tablet to Night River King just yet. As he spoke, he held it tightly. This is a decision from the Full Moon office. You aren't out shopping, kid. You can't haggle with me for a better deal, Night River King said emotionlessly. Han Sun ignored Night River King's jab, and while fiddling with the tablet he said, Planet Blade is where my master used to live. I hope I will be able to visit Planet Blade during the times that I miss her. I would like permission to access Planet Blade whenever I fancy. I cannot permit this. Planet Blade belongs to the elders, and this is known to the public of Narrow Moon. People cannot just go there willy-nilly. Not even I can go there without proper permission, Night River King said seriously. Night River King certainly could have provided Han Sun access to the planet, but he didn't want to help Han Sun in any way. Han Sun did not speak. He merely continued to play with the tablet. He didn't sign the paper either. All he did was smile at Night River King. Night River King frowned and retreated into thought for a moment. Okay, fine. I will help. I will go and talk to the elders on your behalf, and I will see if I can get you permission. I don't need you to talk. I need you to add that permission onto this list. Han Sun stared at Night River King icily as he spoke. That is impossible. Don't push me too far now, Night River King growled. Without that permission added to this list, you can find someone else to sign it. But you won't see my name on it, Han Sun said simply. Night River King looked gloomy, but he didn't look mad just yet. He turned to Han Sun and said, You can only enter Planet Blade. You cannot touch anything there then. Night River King didn't want to cause any trouble for himself. After all, he and the elders had already taken many things that, by all rights, should have now belonged to Han Senator. If Han Sun didn't sign the agreement, that unfairness would get way too much exposure. I only miss her. I do not want to take anything from there, Han Sun said. Night River King amended the list for Han Sun without saying a word. He provided Han Sun with permission to access Planet Blade freely. When he was finished, Han Sun signed it. He confirmed his acceptance of the measly legacy, and then he passed the tablet to Night River King. Han Sun didn't look at the list. Night River King would only have given him whatever the rebate were willing to part with. They had taken everything they wanted, and they had left what they didn't. There was no point in looking at the stuff. Seeing Han Sun packing up Isha's things, Night River King laughed inside and thought to himself, what is the point to get permission to go to Planet Blade? You will never receive any more resources from the rebate. Han Sun took Isha's legacy items back to Planet Eclipse with him. He had gained many treasures, but not a single one of them was king class. The highest were 2 dupe treasures that weren't even useful to him. The other things were worth nothing, and they would not benefit him in the least either. Is that all she possessed as a half-deified being? Han Sun laughed darkly. He thought the whole of Narrow Moon must have looted Isha's warehouse already. They had only left him with the meaningless scrap. Even so, there was nothing Han Sun could do about it. The only person that could back him up was gone, so there was no way he'd ever get his hands on those things. Isha seemed to have known that though, and that was why she told Han Sun to let go. I will let go, only if I should, but I will not let go of anything that belongs to me by right. Han Sun smiled. Han Sun put the items in storage in his warehouse on Planet Eclipse. He took out the few useful items, some of which were things Isha always made use of. Isha's death had crushed the rebate, but people like Night River King had benefited a great deal from her passing. They were probably happy about what had happened. Brother-in-law, are we staying here in Narrow Moon? Ji Qing asked Han Sr. Of course we are. Planet Eclipse has a fair amount of resources, and if we were to leave, we'd be allowing others to benefit. Han Sun smiled. But Night River King and the others keep trying to undermine you. The coming days on Planet Eclipse won't go well for you, Ji Qing said. It is hard to say who will have a difficult time and who will not, Han Sun murmured, squinting his eyes in thought. Han Sun did not plan on leaving Narrow Moon. He didn't like the idea of being kicked out. He'd leave on his own terms. The 15th day of the month rolled around, and Night River King went to Cold Palace for the first time since accepting the position of Cold Palace Guardian. He merrily trekked up to the stone house and settled himself on the porch as the Cold Palace Guardian. With this Cold Palace Guardian position, I might become half deified in a mere 2 centuries. I will be able to replace Knife in Narrow Moon. Night River King grinned at the thought. He held the Cold Palace Guardian tablet so tightly that his hands began to shake. He had waited for this opportunity for so long. Time passed and midnight came. Night River King looked at the stone door, waiting for the deified toad to emerge. Suddenly, Night River King saw a shadow walking across the mountain. He was shocked. Planet Blade was taken, so no one should have been wandering around. And on top of that, it was a restricted area. Chapter 2191. In front of Cold Palace, Night River King quickly recognized that shadow. He frowned and said, "What is Han Sun doing here?" Han Sun had journeyed over the range of mountains to arrive near Cold Palace. He looked at the time and found that he still had 5 minutes to go. This was perfect. "Han Sun, what are you doing? You are not the Cold Palace Guardian anymore. Don't you know that this place is restricted?" Night River King shouted at Han. Senator Han Sun smiled and said, "Night River King, are you too old to remember things correctly? Don't you remember that I was given permission to access any location on Planet Blade? You allowed this yourself." Night River King looked glum at first, but then he laughed. He looked up at Han Sun with disdain and said, "This is why you wanted access to Planet Blade? That's fine. If you would like to watch me absorb moonlight, then feel free to watch. But don't blame me for not saving you when you freeze to death, because you don't have access to the tablet and its protection." Night River King believed Han Sun must have had a death wish. He was only a marquis after all. Not even Night River King would remain there without the tablet's protection. If the deified toad was some distance away from him, Night River King could fight back against the cold power it created with his own power. But he would absorb less moonlight in the process. Without the tablet, the deified toad wouldn't allow him close. And if he made the toad mad, he'd likely lose his life. Han Sun wouldn't be there for long. Han Sun wouldn't stay if the deified toad emerged. Night River King believed that Han Sun was about to run off. But then, Han Sun approached. He was in front of the stone house now, standing on the other side of the door. Han Sun saw Night River King smile at him, and so he said, "Night River King, you are so weird. You could be a king, but instead, you have come to guard this door." Night River King's chuckle was brittle. "Yeah, well, one of us doesn't even have permission to guard the door." Night River King raised his head. "Don't say I haven't warned you. There is less than a minute to go until the Jade Toad comes out. If you don't run off now, it will be too late for you by the time it emerges, and I will be unable to save you. Thank you very much for reminding me, but I'll go when I feel like it," Han Sun responded flatly. Night River King hummed to himself and did not speak. He thought Han Sun was there to play some sort of prank on him. Without the Guardian tablet, though, it was only a matter of time before the annoying Marquis gave up and left. Time ticked by, and the Jade Toad was on the verge of coming out. But even so, Han Sun gave no sign of wanting to leave the area. "Whatever happens next, you had it coming. If you die, you die. If you honestly think I will make an effort to save you, you are gravely mistaken. When Knife was still around, I wouldn't have allowed you to die in my proximity, but now that she's gone." Night River King's smile was full of teeth. Boom! The door of the stone house opened, and a gust of frosty air came out. It washed out like a tide, freezing the whole area around the house. It turned the basin of water into an iced-over lake. A green toad started to emerge from the stone cave. The waterfall and the river quickly froze as well. This is definitely a deified creature. Even the power surrounding it is so strong. The icy power it commands is shocking to witness. Night River King thought in awe. He turned to look at Han's Senator. There was no way Han Sun could repel the frosty air. So Night River King figured that he'd swiftly turn to ice. But when he looked, he found Han Sun standing casually in his original position. His body was like jade, and he looked normal. It didn't seem as if he was freezing at all. Night River King stared, and he thought to himself, "What is this? Although the frosty air is a passive effect that the toad gives off, not even a duke should be able to block it at this proximity. If I did not have the guardian tablet with me, even I would have to be careful at this range. Why is Han-sen not freezing? As Night River King wondered this, the deified toad emerged. Its green eyes looked at Night River King. Even when it saw the tablet in his hands, the beast ignored him. It turned its head to look at Han. Senator Night River King laughed. I don't know what you have done to keep your body from freezing, but the guardian tablet is an agreement between the Jade Toad and my race. Without the tablet, the Jade Toad won't stand for you being here. He will eat you. You were too cocky to come here, and you will now pay for this by dying. The Jade Toad looked at Han's son on the other side of the door, but it didn't do anything to him. It merely meandered onwards to the pool. Night River King wondered, has the Jade Toad not killed in so long that it is no longer interested in meat? When the Jade Toad made it to the pool, 20 or 30 small Jade Toads came out of the water. They all looked about the same size as a football. They shimmered like jade too. They were all so beautiful. When the small Jade Toads climbed out, they saw Han's son standing near the door. Some of them ran towards Han's senator. Seeing this, Night River King was made very happy. Good, good, good. Although these small Jade Toads haven't reached their adult strength, if they attack Han's son and he resists, he will be killed by the deified Jade Toad. Night River King grinned at the prospect. But the scene that followed made Night River King freeze. The small Jade Toads weren't coming to attack Han's senator when they clambered around him. He crouched and started to pat their heads. Then he picked up two. What the hell? Night River King couldn't think straight, and he was starting to look as cold as the ice itself. The Jade Toad was thought to be very cruel. Because the rebate had a deal with it, people with the guardian tablet were allowed near it. No one would dare come to where it lived without the tablet though. The fact that the Jade Toad hadn't eaten Han's son had surprised Night River King. But seeing Han's son happily playing with the deified creatures young was bizarre. Night River King was starting to think that some sort of glamour had been placed on him. The small Jade Toads weren't following. The deified Jade Toad stopped and looked at Han Sr. He dares to touch the small Jade Toads? The deified Jade Toad will surely be angry about this. Night River King thought desperately. But the deified Jade Toad only made a noise. It turned around and kept going up towards the frozen lake. Han's son was still holding one little Jade Toad, and he followed the crowd across the lake and up the waterfall. How? The deified toad is allowing an outsider to sit next to it? Night River King froze. His expression turned very foul. Chapter 2192. Fighting Han's son stood atop the waterfall, absorbing the moon and cold powers alongside the smaller Jade Toads. When Night River King saw this, his face hardened. Inside, he was thinking to himself, this must have been set up before Knife left or something. That must have been why she allowed him to become the Cold Palace Guardian. How could Knife treat an outsider so well without sparing a second thought to her own kind, the rebate? Night River King thought this must have been a scheme concocted by Isha. That was the only explanation he could think of for Hansen's immunity to the cold powers, and his friendship with the Jade Toad. He had no idea that, in reality, Isha hadn't been able to get that close to the Jade Toad either. He was angry, but there was nothing he could do to Han's senator. He most certainly regretted giving Han's son permission to access Planet Blade. If he hadn't caved in, Han's son wouldn't have been able to do anything. Night River King forced himself to ignore Hansen's presence for the moment. He cast his Geno art and readied himself to absorb the moonlight. But just as he prepared to absorb the moonlight, Han's son stepped forward atop the waterfall and went before the moonlight that the Jade Toad was spitting out. By doing that, he completely blocked it from Night River King. Night River King's parcel of land was left completely dark. He was wholly inside Hansen's shadow, and he couldn't see the moonlight he wished to absorb. Damn it! Night River King thought furiously. But in the presence of the Jade Toad, he wouldn't dare make a disturbing noise. He didn't want to interrupt the Jade Toad, which was still in the process of unleashing moonlight. Night River King didn't think the Jade Toad was all that nice of a creature. The Jade Toad used to be very infamous for its cruelty. It had once swallowed a planet and killed countless people. Its true self couldn't have been as friendly as it seemed to be with Han Senator. The Jade Toad wasn't in Narrow Moon as a subordinate of the rebate. It was a joint partnership. The Jade Toad had to spit out moonlight to practice its Geno arts. Narrow Moon had many moons, so it was the perfect place for it to practice. The Jade Toad had intended to enter Narrow Moon by brute force. It would have begun a war, and during that war, it probably would have extinguished the lantern of the rebate. Luckily, the Extreme King had intervened. They stopped the deified creature and established the working deal between the Toad and the rebate. The Jade Toad was permitted to live in Narrow Moon, and in the meantime, the rebate would look after it. The rebate would send one person with the Guardian Tablet, and the Toad would also allow that individual to absorb the moonlight powers. And if Narrow Moon even faced a crisis, the Jade Toad would have to chip in and help. Over the many years since, the Jade Toad had been taken care of by the rebate. And always, one of the rebate was elected to absorb the moonlight. It was a peaceful thing, and kings like Night River King, who was very old, still remembered the time when the Jade Toad wished to force its way into the Narrow Moon system. The fear had been constant in those days, and the old king knew better than to attempt provoking it. Now Han's sun was there, blocking the moonlight, and it was prohibiting him from absorbing the moon powers. A dour look etched itself into Night River King's face. His forehead was green, and the blood vessels in his eyes looked like they were about to burst. There was nothing he could do about it either. Night River King gritted his teeth, looked around, and thought to himself, if Han's sun is allowed to go up there, then I should be able to select a different spot to sit. Night River King wanted to move to a different position, but he didn't dare go close to the waterfall. He just wanted to place himself at a different angle to absorb the moonlight powers from an area that wasn't cloaked by Hansen's shadow. Night River King wasn't sure if that would work or not. The agreement with the Toad stated that the Guardian must always remain on the porch. If he wasn't permitted to go anywhere else, then he had no way of keeping Han's sun from blocking the moonlight. Not a single ray of light would be able to reach him, and he'd be unable to practice. But of course, that wasn't something he'd be willing to let happen. Night River King mustered the courage necessary to risk moving. While looking at the Jade Toad, he raised one leg with the intent of putting it down off the porch. But the moment his leg rose, the Jade Toad atop the waterfall moved its eyeball and looked his way. A chill rolled over Night River King's heart. He stopped, as if he had been stricken with petrification. Cold sweat covered his brow, and he didn't dare complete the move. He pulled his leg back. The Jade Toad returned to looking at the sky. It was as if nothing had happened. Why? How could things turn out this way? Night River King stood in place, his forehead glistening with sweat. His face had gone ashen, robbed of color and fixed with a contorted expression. It had been a long struggle for him to gain the position of guardian. But now that he had finally achieved his goal, he was unable to see any of the moonlight the Jade Toad was spitting out. He could only sit there uselessly and enjoy the cool breeze, like a run-of-the-mill security guard. Han Sun, I will kill you, Night River King hissed. He stared up at the back of the man standing atop the waterfall, and a capillary pulsed in his forehead. Of course, while the Toad was still there, Night River King could only remain where he was. He had almost ground his teeth to dust. Han's sun hadn't spared Night River King a single glance the entire time though. He stood in front of the moonlight, absorbing as much of the power as he could, all alone. He knew Night River King despised him, but so what? If Han's sun just gave up without fighting, that was exactly what would make Night River King happy. And it would only halt Han's sun's progress in leveling up. Humanity was born to compete. Even from the time each individual was a sperm amongst billions of others, everything was a race. In a family, fighting siblings for resources was common. Fighting against classmates for opportunities, or fighting against your workmates for chances of advancement. Fighting off creatures for the claim of food. Fighting for the chance to be the one who would evolve first. If someone refused to fight, they'd never become better. They'd never reach the top. If Han's sun had been afraid to fight, he wouldn't be traveling the road he was currently on. Instead of coming to the Geno universe, he'd have stayed at home to make babies. Anyone who crossed over to the Geno universe, whether they were Han's sun or Ningyu, They all knew what they would face, a fight. They would do anything to proceed, and falling back wasn't an option. Night River King had cut off Han Sen's resources. That meant he had put a stop to Han Sen's chances of evolving. That was as bad as killing Han Sen's parents. And that meant Han Sen couldn't settle for peace with him. The moment Han Sen accepted the legacy items, he knew right away that only one of them would end up hurting. Night River King stood on the stone porch, and he stared at the shadow falling from atop the waterfall. He wanted to kill Han Sen, but he could only stand and watch as the man absorbed the moon power. Han Sen looked so cold and proud. In his mind, he swore that if anyone fought against him for resources, they'd be the ones left chewing dust. The shadow was like a mountain's, and it left Night River King gasping. He really wanted to kill Han Senator, and he began to scheme for a way in which he could make Han Sen dead. Chapter 2193. You don't know my eye. The moonlight was bright, and Han Sen still stood near the jade toad. He quietly absorbed all the moon and cold powers he could draw in. The jade toad was treating him well partially, because he had proficiency in the practice of jade skin. After he absorbed the moon and cold power, his power and aura became closer to the jade toad's. That was why the jade toad was okay with him being there. But still, that wasn't enough for the jade toad to treat him so specially. The toad's kindness was mostly because of another important reason. Han Sen had the title Son of Moon. Wherever Han Sen went, the moon presented him with moonlight. The moonlight was very strong, and since the jade toad had to spit out moons to practice its own Geno arts, Han Sen's presence benefited them all. It was good for the deified toad, and it was good for the smaller toads. So, the jade toad was happy to allow Han Sen to do whatever he wished. Han Sen knew that the toad's goodwill depended on his reciprocation. He was useful to the jade toad, and that was why he was being treated nicely. Otherwise, the deified Xenogeniac would have forced him to remain on the porch. Han Sen didn't think he was prettier than others. Even if he was handsome, he didn't think the jade toad knew how to determine the beauty of humans for favoritism. Han Sen only figured that out after sitting down and having a good think. Han Sen had paid close attention to his relationship with the toad. Otherwise, he wouldn't have dared fight against Night River King for the moonlight, especially without having the tablet. It was just that the jade toad needed him, and Han Sen had realized it. The toad wouldn't be angry, because he didn't have the guardian tablet. When the reflection of the moon was on the water, Han Sen's image seemed to grow crisper and clearer. The moon power and the cold power drifted inside of Han Senator. They made his genes quietly evolve to a better level. 22 hours later, Night River King was still moving around on the stone porch. Han Sen's body was wholly blocking the moon. Try as he might, Night River King couldn't absorb an ounce of that moonlight. It didn't matter how angry Night River King was. All he could do was sit there. He was unable to leave. He had to wait until the jade toad returned to Cold Palace. Once it had fully vanished through the door, only then could he leave. But Night River King wasn't planning on going anywhere. He was waiting for the jade toad to enter Cold Palace. Han Sen was just a marquise, and he had humiliated Night River King a lot. This was something Night River King wasn't willing to accept. He had to wait until the jade toad returned to Cold Palace. And when it was gone, he'd kill Han Senator even though Isha was dead. Killing Han Sen would still damage his reputation. But no one would offend Night River King. In order to protect the soon-to-be-deceased Han Senator, Night River King was very confident. He knew his limits. He knew what he could and couldn't do. Otherwise, he wouldn't have remained so calm in the days when Isha was alive and well. He had never brought harm to Han Senator over the course of time. Though, Night River King had become calmer and calmer. He paid attention to the time, and he knew each tick of the clock brought Han Sen 1 second closer to the doom that awaited him. Eventually, the jade toad brought the little jade toads down the frozen waterfall. They went back into the stone cave as they always did. Night River King stood where he was, not daring to make a move just yet. He stared at Han Sen, his eyes intent. Night River King knew that to kill someone, you had to remain calm. Blinding yourself with anger would only make you lose control. Mistakes usually arose from careless anger. Even though Han Sen was just a marquise, Night River King did not want to leave too much in the way of evidence. Night River King wasn't the most famous character in the rebate. His talents were only considered fair. It was rather unique that he had survived and made it to king class, because the geniuses of his generation were all dead. When the Jade Toads all retreated back into the stone cave, the stone door closed. Then, Night River King went over to Han Senator. He walked with a straight back, as calm as the water in a well. Han son, you are still too young. You don't know your place, in that you don't know what you should do and what you shouldn't do, Night River King said as he approached Han Senator. He didn't plan to strike just yet. He just followed the path that would take him to Han Senator. His black robe waved in the breeze of the night. It wasn't as if he couldn't kill Han Senator, he just didn't want to do it there, in the event that what he did disturbed the Jade Toad. Although Night River King didn't think the Jade Toad would avenge Han Sen's death, if he planned to kill Han Sun, he'd have to kill him in one hit. He couldn't afford Han Sun the chance of a getaway. He'd only have one shot. Oh, I don't? Then tell me, what is it that I should do? Han Sun asked with a laugh. Wait. You have to endure the heaviness and strike in one fell swoop. A mature fighter would have this thought in mind when facing an enemy that is stronger than he, Night River King said coldly. A black ribbon began to swirl around his hands. It was like a snake that was coiling and slithering around a branch. You are right. Han Sun nodded. He agreed with what he was told. Night River King laughed and said, Then it looks like you can still be saved. Let me give you one more opportunity. Leave now and never set foot on Planet Blade ever again. Han Sun stopped. He looked at Night River King with disdain. What you say might be right, but you don't know my eye. What about your eye? Night River King asked calmly. Han Sun laughed. In my eyes, you are not strong. Why must I wait? Good point. You must be prepared to accept the wrath of a king. Night River King had started calmly, but he ground out the final words between clenched teeth. And then, his hand that was surrounded with black water rose. The black water became an enormous beast that looked ready to consume Han Senator. Even a mountain could find itself swallowed by the black water beast. The sight of that river was unnerving. Night River King was using his strongest Geno art. He wasn't holding back in the least. As Han Sun seemed about to be consumed by the black water, a blue light suddenly encased his body. His form was wrapped up by a translucent blue shield. Boom! The terrifying black water beast bit down on it. It swallowed a chunk of the ground Han Sun was standing near. A hole was torn into the soil, as if the planet's surface was an apple. I know you have the power to block a king-class attack, but my Night River Beast God is different. Its power may not be the strongest out of king-class attacks, but it might very well be the longest-lasting. No matter how strong your treasure is, no one can withstand this attack if they are not of the same level as this strike. Night River King sounded cold, and his murderous tone seemed like it could freeze all who heard him. The black water beast was wrapped around Han Sen's shield, and it didn't fall back. Its power was corrosive, and it suffused the blue shield in its energy. Suddenly, Night River King frowned. The black water was moving, but something was rumbling. Chapter 2194. Nothing out of the ordinary. The highly corrosive power of that black water was something like a whetstone. It looked like a grinder that could wear a diamond down into dust. It whirled continuously just outside the blue shield. Night River King was confident in his Night River Beast God. The Geno art didn't have overwhelming strike power like Ish_S teeth powers, which could one-hit kill almost any enemy. But this corrosive and grinding power could destroy king-class weapons. Even a deified item could be reduced to dust if Night River's attack bore down on it for long enough. Night River King didn't believe Han Sen's shield was deified. And even if he did, with Han Sen's Marquis power, he wouldn't be able to use it at max capacity. Whatever the blue shield was, it wouldn't last long if Han Sen's rank was below the items. This was the rule that applied to all treasures. Night River King believed his power would be able to break Han Sen's shield and kill him. All he required was time. Night River King only hoped that no other Narrow Moon elite took notice of his actions before Han Sun was dead. If someone interrupted, that would ruin his night. Sadly, Night River King was woefully uninformed about the differences between a beast's soul and a treasure. A marquise could not make use of all the power of a treasure. That was true. But that did not apply to a beast's soul. A treasure required the power of its user to support its usage, but a user's power wasn't needed when it came to a beast's soul. Beneath the black water wheel that was like a countless number of gears all spinning together, the demon bug Bysema was not incurring a single point of damage. The half-deified demon bug Bysema, when it shrank far enough to only shield one person, provided a defense that could only be defined as insane. No opponent could break through it unless they were half-deified themselves. Only dust could be scraped off its surface. To those with king-class power, its resilience was mind-boggling. Night River King's power is quite interesting. His attack power isn't the strongest, but it holds a strong corrosive ability, and it's shaped to create a grinding action as well. It's a pretty smart technique. Han Sun observed the black water that was spinning like a wheel, and as he did he walked forward. The Bysema followed Han Sun's movement, breaking away from the black water as it went. Night River King could see the mass of black water moving, and the blue shield was becoming lighter and lighter as it emerged from within. Han Sun was forcing his way out of the Night River Beast God. What a powerful treasure! Night River King's face turned dim. He watched as Han Sun broke away from the water with his blue shield and walked away. But Night River King seemed to expect this would happen. Unhurriedly, he put his hand to his waist and brought out a black blade. It was serrated, and its shape was like a crescent moon. He lifted it and slashed towards Han Senator. The spinning crescent blade carried Night River Beast God power with it, too. And it was headed right for Han Sen's demon bug Bysema. The wheel power came against the surface of the demon bug Bysema hard, and a flurry of sparks flew at the contact. A loud screeching noise accompanied it. "Let's see how much force you can really repel," Night River King murmured. The crescent blade sent out an unbroken series of slashes, and the black water came down on the blue shield again. Han Sun ignored it though. He just kept walking across Planet Blade. Night River King had been very confident at one point. He would break Han Sen's shield before anyone else noticed. And when that was done, Night River King would kill him. That way, the matter would be finished. Even if it wasn't looked upon fondly, no one would bother raising an issue with Night River King's deed. Plus, Han Sun wasn't one of the rebate. He was an outsider. If everybody hadn't agreed with this fact, then they wouldn't have agreed to split Isha's legacy items up amongst themselves. But the black water wheel that kept pounding the small blue shield was not proving effective. It was like a fairy wheel, grinding uselessly against the water. Night River King created many of those black water wheels. A lot of destructive power was now focused on the shield, but the blue shield's appearance hadn't changed. Han Sun didn't seem exhausted either. It was as if he didn't have to use his own strength to keep the shield up. Impossible. No matter what the treasure is, it has to be feeding off his power. Night River King's face looked very gloomy, but still he kept attacking the shield. And try as he might, nothing seemed to work. Many giant black water wheels hit the shield, making the shield look tiny beneath their mass and weight. After a countless number of them were used, the shield was still there. It was unfathomable, because that amount of corrosive power would have reduced the planet itself to space dust. But the shield still gave off the same blue light, unhindered and unharmed. Night River King was causing such a ruckus that it was only a matter of time before Moonwheel King and the others took notice. And they did. What is Night River King doing? Knife has only just passed away, and already he seeks to kill her only student. What would Night River King's own student feel? Moonwheel King looked grim. When Black Moon King saw this, he himself looked very dim. Then he smiled and said, "Night River King, you have abandoned your own honor and tried to kill a student. But look at you, you have failed. You are a complete and utter embarrassment." The few other kings of Narrow Moon, witnessing the situation, looked on with confused expressions. They were all well acquainted with Night River King's power. They knew he wasn't the strongest, but if he had time, he should have been able to grind down a king-class weapon. Han Sen's blue shield was not even quivering beneath Night River King's unrelenting attack. The kings had never seen anything like it. What kind of treasure is that, though? It has that sort of defense even in the hands of a marquise. Everyone wondered. Han Sun stepped off the surface of Planet Blade. Night River King kept trying to kill him, but all his attempts were useless. He couldn't stop Han Sun from proceeding. Rage and embarrassment warred across Night River King's face. Despite sacrificing his reputation in front of the other kings, he hadn't even managed to mess up Han Sen's hair. Shame washed through him. Night River King roared to the sky, and more black water rose from him. His power exploded. His serrated crescent flashed towards Han Sun, who was still rising from Planet Blade. A flying crescent headed toward Han Sun, carrying the power of the black water behind it. It struck the blue shield with all force. The king-class weapon kept spinning against the blue shield. It ground harshly against the shield, emitting many sparks and sounds. It lit up the entire sky. Planet Blade was overtaken by the noise and lights, and all the creatures fled as far away as they could. Only the king-class elites stayed to watch. Now many of them saw the sparks in the sky. The elites stared at the light show in the sky, which centered on Han Sun encased in his blue shield. Their eyes traced the lines of the crescent with its black water power. They stood in silence for a long moment. Isn't that Night River King's king-class weapon? Isn't that the crescent blade? How? What did Han Sun do to provoke Night River King? What would inspire Night River to attack with the serrated crescent? The sky erupted with sparks like there was an ongoing fireworks show. The serrated crescent kept grinding, but the kings could see that Han Sen's shield had yet to crack, and the jagged teeth of the crescent blade were beginning to the toothy crescent blade was going to lose its teeth. And even so, it was unable to break Han Sen's shield. River Knight Beast God is failing already? It's really nothing out of the ordinary, huh? Han Sen's voice bellowed all across Narrow Moon. He ignored the crescent blade and kept flying with the wind. Night River King's eyes were bulging with fury, but he couldn't stop Han Sun from moving. He saw Han Sun leaving slowly, and as he did, he felt a mixture of hopelessness, shame, and anger. A fire burned in Night River King's chest, making his blood pulse savagely. Chapter 2195 Jade Drum. Night River King wanted to kill Han Senator. He even used his crescent blade, but try as he might, he couldn't lay so much as a finger on Han Senator when Han Sun left the planet unharmed. Night River's failure made him a laughingstock to all the nobles inside Narrow Moon. Although ordinary nobles wouldn't mock Night River King to his face, they were more than happy to discuss it while his back was turned. They were all surprised that Han Sen's shield was so powerful, and that Night River King had performed so poorly. A while ago, Han Sun handed out his spare by Semace to Zero, Little Angel, and Han Menger. He kept the gold one for himself. Han Sun did this because he wanted them to guard the base. If king-class elites ever attacked the base, his companions could use the tricolor by Sema to protect it. By combining the three shields of different colors, the defensive properties could then protect the entire base from an assault. King-class elites wouldn't be able to punch through that easily. If Night River King decided to go all the way, Han Sun had to ensure that his base was protected. He couldn't afford to be ambushed unprepared. And as for Han Yen, Han Sun had contacted Sky Palace in the hopes he could secure a place for her there. When they accepted her, he'd give her the gold by Sema, so that her own safety was assured. It would be great if I was able to obtain a few more by Sema Beast souls. Han Sun already had 4, but he was of the mind that it wasn't enough. He imagined finding and killing a few more of those demon bug kings. At this stage, Han Sun didn't need to be afraid of anything. He went to Cold Palace to absorb moon and cold powers on every 1st and every 15th day of the month. Every single time. He also blocked all the moonlight that might otherwise fall on Night River King. He received nothing. Night River King had finally gotten the guardian position, but all he could ever do was sit around and watch Han Sun get all the goodies he had wanted for himself. The refreshing breeze was all he could enjoy. He hated Han Sun to the depths of his soul, but he now knew there was nothing he could do to him. He looked for another elite who might be willing to stop Han Sun from visiting Planet Blade, but even the other kings that were friends with him, like Shadow King, did not agree with him. The Narrow Moon Assembly had cooperated against Han Sun when Isha died, because they wished to share Isha's legacy items. Even the nobles that followed Isha did not want to give Han Sun all her things. He was an outsider, and they all wanted some of her stuff for themselves. That's why no one had objected when Han Sun was given almost nothing. Now things were different. The items were distributed and Night River King had become the guardian, so there was no longer a reason for anyone to help him take Han Sun out. Isha had only just died, and they had already stolen what Han Sun deserved. What would people think of them if they went after Han Sun again? Plus, Han Sun had that powerful Bisema. He'd be very difficult to take down, and there was no guarantee they could. Night River King had already tried to overcome the shield, and it had only led to a soured reputation. The other kings did not want to do something that wouldn't benefit them. It was none of their business. Night River King couldn't stop Han Sun alone. So 2 nights a month, Night River King was forced to watch as Han Sun absorbed that moonlight. He hated the fact that Han Sun had weaseled permission to access the planet out of him. But now it was too late. Han Sun never missed a day. And eventually, Night River King lost all interest in going to Planet Blade. Han Sun kept practicing with his cold and moon powers, hoping to become a duke soon. And then, he'd be able to absorb duke genes. Night River King wasn't crazy enough to go to Planet Eclipse, although he wanted to very much. Part of him wanted to go and crush the planet in every way. But even causing an issue with the delivery of supplies didn't seem likely. There weren't many people in the base, and on top of that, there were many resources around. So they wouldn't run out of food anytime soon. And in regards to everything else, they were well supplied there as well. Black Moon King gave Han Sun some additional help, which ensured that Planet Eclipse wasn't an isolated community. Isolation did not mean anything to Han Sun, but he appreciated the aid he was given. Time passed, and Han Sun's Jadeskin neared Duke level. But before he could break through and reach the rank of Duke, he received a message from Huang Fujing. That surprised Han. Senator Huang Fujing was a very independent woman. Her title in the alliance was Queen, and her personality fit that title very well. If she was contacting Han Sun out of the blue, then something must have happened. What happened? Han Sun asked immediately. There was no need for formalities with her. Huang Fujing answered just as directly. I am on planet Jade Drum. There's trouble. Tell me clearly. Han Sun scanned through an overview of planet Jade Drum as he walked and talked. Planet Jade Drum was a planet that belonged to 1,000 treasures. There was a xenogeneic there that was named Jade Drum. It was the namesake of the planet. Stone Drum, Steel Drum, Bronze Drum, Silver Drum, Gold Drum, Jade Drum. Those 6 xenogeneics were ordinarily Duke class, and all of them lived exclusively on planet Jade Drum. According to the information he dug up, Jade Drums could become King class, but the King class Jade Drums were usually taken away from planet Jade Drum. The Jade Drums were highly sought after because they were very unique. The creatures couldn't move, and they required other races to help them travel around the universe. Normally, drums would follow a stronger race. If someone wished to take a drum away, they would have to receive drum's approval. If this was given, the drum would allow itself to be removed from planet Jade Drum. Jade Drum xenogeneics were musical xenogeneics. They could go anywhere in the universe and absorb sound to level up. The powers they wielded were sonic as well. If someone kept a Jade Drum next to them, and they were attacked with sonic power, the Jade Drum would shield them and fight back with sonic powers of its own. Huang Fujing was off exploring. When she went by planet Jade Drum, she wanted to try her luck at catching a silver drum. Surprisingly, Huang Fujing received the approval of a Jade Drum. But after that, things started to go poorly. The Jade Drums belonged to 1,000 treasures. 1,000 treasures kept the creatures there as free treasures. Anyone who bought a ticket from 1,000 treasures could go to planet Jade Drum and find a drum that might wish to accept them. As far as how one went about finding a drum and gaining their approval, 1,000 treasures did not care. They would just register the drums that were taken away. Huang Fujing was just an earl, but she had gained the approval of a Jade Drum. 1,000 treasures might still allow her to take it, but if she registered it, everyone would learn that an earl had taken a Jade Drum. She would be safe on planet Jade Drum, but many people would seek to take it away from her if she left. So, Huang Fujing hadn't registered it yet. Instead, she called Han Sr. Chapter 2196 Sound as he spoke to Huang Fujing. Han Sun had a look at the route and estimated the travel time it would take for him to get there. Don't register it just yet. Wait for me on planet Jade Drum. I'll be there in 4 days. Can you wait that long? Since the entry pass for planet Jade Drum was only valid for 10 days, visitors would be forced out if their allotted time expired. That was why Han Sun had to confirm that he would make it in time. Yes, I am still eligible to be here for another 6 days, Huang Fujing answered. Okay then, wait for me. Han Sun sighed with relief. Han Sun hung up the phone and readied himself to go to planet Jade Drum. With Huang Fujing's ability level and intelligence, he wouldn't worry too much for her safety there. But bringing the Jade Drum back safely would be difficult. Planet Jade Drum was named after the Jade Drums, but Jade Drums were rare. Many Sonic Kings wished to locate a Jade Drum in order to grow their powers. It would be rather magnificent if they managed to get a King-class Jade Drum for themselves. But Huang Fujing, who was only an Earl, had managed to secure a Jade Drum for herself. It was going to be hard to get it away from there, without attracting unwanted attention. Han Sun had his demon bug shield, so he wasn't afraid of any king-class enemies. All he feared was the prospect of more than one king on the lookout for him. That could go badly. Han Sun packed up his things and told Han Yen and the others not to leave the base while he was away. He took Bauer with him as he left Narrow Moon, and they used a wormhole to get to planet Jade Drum. Han Sun had only just left Narrow Moon when Night River King received word of his departure. Han Sun, you know what? It's fine if I can't kill you. I can still make you suffer a fate worse than death. Night River King's face was all twisted, and his eyes shone with a malevolent hatred. A duke came and bowed to Night River King. My king, I have done everything you asked me to. Good. Very good. Night River King waved his hand to excuse the duke. He then turned his attention to the screen that displayed Planet Eclipse. With a twisted smile he said, Han Sun, I can't wait to see the look on your face when you come back and realize all your friends are dead. I will be looking forward to that. The day after Han Sun's departure, a fleet of ships entered Narrow Moon. They were cargo ships that delivered produce. They were outsiders to Narrow Moon, so they had to pay taxes to enter. There were many resources aboard, with many hailing from a variety of different planets. There were many xenogeneics, which made for their primary load of cargo. When the ship went by Planet Eclipse, one of the ships broke down. Many of the xenogeneics escaped from the ship and scattered across Narrow Moon. The people of Narrow Moon attempted to capture them again. As this occurred, someone snuck into Planet Eclipse and placed one of those xenogeneics atop a mountain there. It was a xenogeneic that looked like a queen bee. Instead of the expected yellow and black, however, its body was dark red. When that xenogeneic regained its freedom, it killed a whole host of xenogeneics all across that mountain. Then it placed eggs inside the bodies of the slain. The eggs were red as well. Those eggs incubated quickly, and as this happened, the corpses dried and shriveled into husks. It was like the eggs were absorbing all the nutrients that the bodies had to offer. Not long after, the bees began to hatch and journey to a single mountain amidst a vast range. Together, they hollowed it out. There were many entrances all across the mountain slopes. It was like a huge beehive, and many of those red bees came in and out. As all this occurred, no one in the base took notice. Han Sun had told everyone to stay inside the base when he left, so his people did as they were instructed. No one went hunting and no one left. This situation made the murderous Night River King frown deeply. He quickly said, Han Sun is evil. After he left, he told all of his friends to hide in the base. But hiding away won't do them any good. They're all going to die. We just need to lure the Shadow Queen Bee their way with an incense she likes. If we guide her toward the base, she is sure to kill all of them. Han Sun, when you come back and see all your friends and family have been implanted by the eggs of the Queen Bee, I wonder what the look on your face will be like. Han Sun followed the designated route and arrived at Planet Jade Drum in time. 4 days wasn't a long time, But to Han Sun, the delay was quite worrying. He was afraid Queen and the jade drum might have been discovered by this point. Luckily, all that he feared had not come to pass. He paid the 1,000 treasures some cash, then entered planet Jade Drum. When flying over planet Jade Drum, the planet was visibly covered in gray mountains. No life was visible. There was no countryside, and there were no xenogenics. But that was just the surface of the planet. Inside a large mountain on planet Jade Drum, there was a slew of mines. The drum xenogenics lived there. To look for them, people had to explore the mines and dig. The level of creature they found, however, was determined by a combination of luck and their own abilities. Even king-class elites might only be able to locate a low-level bronze drum or silver drum. Jade drums were incredibly rare. The rate of finding them was often below 1 per year. Han Sun used his phone to give Queen a call, but the call didn't go through. She had turned her communicator off, and that made Han Sun frown. Before entering planet Jade Drum, he had been talking to Queen, but now the phones weren't working. It suggested to him that something must have happened. Fortunately, Han Sun already knew her last location. So he summoned his red cloud and went right for her with Bower. Inside a specific mountain on planet Jade Drum, there was a Taurus Marquise clutching a strange treasure weapon. He looked murderous. He looked at Huang Fujing and laughed. I was just coming here to search for a jade drum and see if I could steal it. Thanks to you, I have found it right here. Give it to me, and I will let you leave here alive. Huang Fujing didn't move, and she calmly looked at the Taurus Marquise. She was confused, unsure how he knew she had managed to find a jade drum. When Huang Fujing spoke to Han Sun, they used their human language. It was very different from the common tongue of the Geno universe. Even if they were overheard, no one should have been able to understand what they were saying. The Taurus slowly neared her. He grinned proudly and said, "You must think it is weird that I understand your language. But I think it's the most natural thing in the universe, because I study sound. No sound can escape my ears. It is a power that allows me to understand any language I hear, even if I have never heard it before. Nothing you say can escape my ears." Chapter 2197 Killer Queen. Where is the jade drum? Give it to me, and I will permit you to live. The Taurus began to approach Huang Fujing, lifting his creepy weapon to point it at her threateningly. The weapon looked very strange. It was roughly the shape of a great sword, but the back of the great sword had a rectangular slot. Inside of that slot, there was something that looked like a string. Huang Fujing gave no response, so the Taurus Marquise looked at her murderously. He unleashed a strike in her direction. That strike was strong. The string in the slot moved and made a sharp sound. Huang Fujing dodged it. She immediately flowed into her heavenly go and phoenix movements, the latter of which she had learned from Han Senator. Just as she was about to evade that sword strike, she suddenly realized that a sonic attack was coming for her, as well. It struck her, and it made her body shake. Her brain felt as if it had been prodded with a number of prickly needles. Catcha! The disorientation allowed the sword to hit Huang Fujing's body, and the blow sent her flying away. Blood trailed behind her through the air. Fortunately, Huang Fujing was incredibly capable at evasive maneuvers. She had a strong will too, so after that sonic attack, she immediately returned to dodging. If she hadn't done this, her arm would have been hacked off. If you don't want me to cut your limbs off one by one, then give me the jade drum. The Taurus Marquise's eyes looked to be on fire. His forelegs sprinted towards Huang Fujing, and his arms lifted the greatsword above his head. And then, the shadow of a red beast appeared behind him. It roared as the greatsword moved, and as this occurred, the sonic power surged angrily into her brain. Huang Fujing wiped the blood off of her face, and slipped back into her heavenly go movements to avoid her foe. Bzzz. Huang Fujing felt as if her brain was being stabbed by knives. It almost left her paralyzed. Still, she managed to dodge the strike and avoid getting hit. The Taurus Marquise saw Huang Fujing evade his greatsword and he frowned. He looked angrier than ever following that. "It is useless," he barked. "With my sonic sword, you will not live. Your only hope is to give me the jade drum." After that, the greatsword came swinging at Huang Fujing with even more speed. The sound emitted by the string grew louder and louder. Huang Fujing's expression didn't change at all though. She calmly looked at the Taurus Marquise, and then her body began to change. Huang Fujing had a Geno armament, which had come after she initially obtained a Geno armor. Just like Han Sen's Dongxian Sutra, it provided her with an entire set of armor. The gold Geno armament clad her entire body. Although it was just an Earl set, it was still very powerful. It was no weaker than the armors possessed by the very top Earls. But that wasn't the scariest thing about her. A strange power started to brew within the gold armor. It changed her actual body. A gold light began to shine from her armor, and the armor itself began to look like red steel. She looked as if she had just emerged from a pool of lava. There was no heat coming off of her, though, and the growing power remained contained by the armor. It made her shine gold. Dong! The greatsword slashed, but this time, Huang Fujing did not dodge. She raised her arm and grabbed the falling blade. That slashing power was brought to a dead halt by Huang Fujing's hand. The blade came to a standstill, and despite the force the Taurus was using, the blade refused to descend any further. The gold-looking hand was glowing, and a flurry of sparks spewed out from the point of contact. The Taurus stared with wide eyes. He could not believe an Earl had managed to block his sword. He was so angry that he couldn't help but roar. As he held his great sword, he began to apply even more force in a bid to drive it downwards. Huang Fujing's eyes shone, and the gold light radiated powerfully from her form. Her other hand was like a blade then, and it came across her body to slash the assaulting greatsword. Pang! The greatsword string snapped under Huang Fujing's strike, and the sharp noises were at last brought to an end. But the force drove Huang Fujing to her knees on the ground. Even without sonic powers, killing you will be a satisfying endeavor, the Taurus thundered. His muscles were bulging, and his shadow looked furious. The greatsword came slashing down at the half-kneeling Huang Fujing. Even as the greatsword came bearing down on her, Huang Fujing remained absolutely calm. And then she moved. She ignored the incoming strike of the greatsword as her gold fist punched up towards the Taurus. Damn! The Taurus Marquise looked upset, but he was still greedy. He had only aimed for her hand. He didn't want to kill her just yet. He needed her to locate the jade drum for him, after all. Just as the greatsword was just about to hit Huang Fujing, her body suddenly disappeared. She teleported behind him, and her fist was driven into the back of his head. Pang! That brightly lit fist hit the back of the Taurus head like a hammer. It broke through his protection and wrecked his helmet. The Sagittarius was both shocked and enraged, and so he hastily swung his sword behind him. But the greatsword found no target. It couldn't touch her, as her body teleported to his left side. A powerful leg swung toward his neck with the ferocity and speed of a hunting cat. Catcha! The glowing leg was like an axe, as it came forward to strike his neck. The leg broke the armor of his neck, and drew blood from his flesh. Huang Fujing did not stop though. She appeared all around him, striking like a killing machine. She attacked him with her fists, fingers, elbows, legs, and knees. She left the Taurus an abundance of wounds. His armor kept breaking further and further with each hit. The Taurus Marquise looked as shocked as some stupid bear. No matter how much he struggled now, he wasn't able to attack Huang Fujing, and every attempted counterattack just ended with him getting hit again. The Taurus was covered in his own blood. Anger, fear, and hopelessness were painted all across his face. It made him scream in pain. Boom! Amidst those crazy attacks, the rest of the Taurus armor broke. Huang Fujing ripped his head off completely, and the headless body slumped to the floor squirting blood. Huang Fujing settled herself back down on the floor. Her face hadn't changed at all. The light glowing from her faded gradually, until she looked like her usual self again. Han Sun had arrived in time to witness Huang Fujing make use of her super god body. Her performance really impressed him. Killer Queen's super god body is real. The unlimited teleporting ability will be more than enough to carry her through this universe. Chapter 2198 Digging Up the Jade Druids was the first time Han Sun had been able to see Huang Fujing's super god body up close. Although her level was low, Her teleportation skill was still a league better than his own break space flash. Break space flash only let him move in a direct line. It appeared as if Huang Fujing's teleportation ability had no such limitations. She could appear at any location she wished to, and when she used her Geno art attacks, her powers teleported along with them. It was quite sick. Luckily, Huang Fujing's level was still low. The teleportation ranges were quite low. If they were any bigger, it'd be something quite frightening. It was a marquise of a lesser race. It's no big deal, Huang Fujing said simply. If someone had said that, they would have been bragging. But Huang Fujing meant exactly what she said. Han Sun just shrugged without speaking. Just as Huang Fujing said, it was an enemy of a lesser race, so the fight hadn't really been too serious. Huang Fujing turned and silently guided Han Sun and Bauer to the mine in which she had located the jade drum. Because she didn't want the jade drum to be found, she hadn't hauled it around with her. She had kept it securely in the mine she had first located it in. Han Sun followed her into the mine, and immediately saw one of the legendary drums. But it was not the jade drum that met his eyes first. It was a steel drum protruding from the stone. It was about a foot long. It was black like steel, and it looked like a drum that you would hang around your waist. A searcher had to dig a steel drum from the rock, and then hit it. If the drum made a noise when it was struck, that would be the sign that the person had earned its approval. Then they could take the drum away from Planet Jade Drum with them. But each ticket only gave a visitor the right to take one creature out with them. So, no matter how many drums a person found, they could only take one away with them. The steel drum was quite common on Planet Jade Drum, so there was no need to spend time locating them. And because of this, not many people actually went looking for them. Han Sun followed Huang Fujing down a very complicated, winding mine shaft. But all they saw along the way were steel drums. They did not even see a single bronze drum. It looked as if it was a very large mine shaft dedicated exclusively to steel drums. Normally, a steel drum would rarely have a bronze drum or silver drum in its general vicinity. There was even less chance of finding a rarer drum. Huang Fujing finding a jade drum there had been most fortuitous. They had been walking down that complicated mine shaft for over a day, when they finally found the place she had spoken about. There were lots of steel drums along the way to that place, and rarely would they spot a bronze drum. It didn't seem likely they'd find a jade drum there, but there was indeed a jade drum in the stone. The drum looked white, and its surface was transparent. It was a very pretty thing to behold. Huang Fujing struck the drum gently, and it responded with a booming noise. To Han Sun, that noise was like an explosion taking place inside his head. And that was what it produced when she only gave it a slight tap. If all of its powers were triggered, it would likely leave Dukes bleeding profusely. If they could level the thing up to King class, it could be even stronger. But leveling up the jade drum to King class wouldn't be an easy feat with Huang Fujing's power. She would still depend heavily on the jade drum's strength while exploring. Why didn't you dig it up? Han Sun asked. The rock around it is too hard. I spent some time trying to dig it up earlier, but I didn't make any progress, Huang Fujing admitted. Han Sun noticed the rocks around the drum had been corroded by the jade drum. The solvent looked like ink. Han Sun pressed his hand into the stone, but he was only able to collect and remove a small amount. It was indeed very hard. Han Sun drew out his ghost teeth knife, though, and he dug the drum out of the stone in a matter of minutes. He tried to tap the drum himself, but it didn't work. So he had no qualms about giving it to Queen. Han Sun was planning to leave the planet alongside Queen right then and there. But all of a sudden, curiosity shone in Bauer's eyes. She leapt off of Han Sun's shoulders and went down a specific path. She yelled over her shoulder to Han Sun, "Dad, let's go here." "Bauer, what have you found?" With curiosity, Han Sun took off after her. Huang Fujing, while carrying the jade drum, followed after Han. Senator Bauer was still leading, and she eventually reached a crevice and crawled into it. The crevice was so small that even Bauer had a hard time squeezing into it. Han Sun and Queen had to compress their bones to fit and squirm their way through. A little while later, Bauer shouted and leapt towards a rock. "Dad, dig here." Bauer pointed at a stone wall. There were steel drums all around, so it didn't look as if there would be anything good in the vicinity. But still Han Sun trusted Bauer. So, he drew out his ghost teeth knife again and began hacking at the black rocks. Beneath the ghost teeth knife's razor edge, the stone was like tofu. The surface of the wall came apart quickly, but his progress soon slowed a little. And the further he went, the harder it became to dig. The stone soon went from the color of steel to various jade colors. Eventually, he reached a black crystal surface. It became so difficult to dig that he began to sweat with the effort. After digging 7 meters, he still hadn't found anything. But then suddenly, there was the dinging noise of his knife striking crystal. The knife hit something, and it couldn't dig any further. Han Sen chopped away the rocks all around, and before long, he found a white jade drum inside the wall he had been working on. A jade drum! Han Sen exulted. He swung the ghost teeth knife faster to fully reveal the drum. After Han Sen dug it up, he kissed Bauer and said, "Bauer, you are such a good daughter." If he had a jade drum to practice with, there was now a chance Han Sen could become king. It was like he was carrying a king-class fighter with him. It was something truly awesome. Bauer blinked and looked at the broken surface of the mountain. She pointed at it and spoke again. "Dad, keep digging. There are even more jade drums." Han Sen was surprised. He followed Bauer directions and kept on digging. Usually, there couldn't be more than one jade drum inside a single mine. It was similar to the way one area rarely had 2 predators. Even though the mine was big, there were already 2 jade drums there. It seemed incredibly unlikely for there to be a third one around. But Bauer must have had her reasons for wanting to continue, and so Han Sen kept going. The rock there was even harder than what they had gone through earlier. Han Sen kept giving it his full power, but he could only peel away thin layers of the stone at a time. After half a day, the black rocks began to gleam with red light. Han Sen was even happier than before. The constant digging had soaked him with sweat, but a short time later, he had hacked away enough of the black crystal. The surface of a drum became visible. It was indeed a jade drum, but it looked different from the usual ones. This jade drum was built from jade, but it had red marks across it. The mixed white and red formed a remarkable design. Chapter 2199 Blood Scorpion Jade Drum. Han Sen carefully examined the red patterns that adorned the jade drum and realized that they formed the shape of a scorpion. In all, it was around the size of a man's hand. It was red like jade, and it contrasted sharply with the white surface of the drum. The pattern didn't look as if it had been engraved into the item though. It looked as if an actual scorpion lived beneath the drum's surface. Huang Fujing looked at the blood scorpion jade drum. She blurted in surprise, "I have heard that the jade drum is the best drum you can find. But this one has a scorpion pattern on it. Maybe this is even better? It could be a king-class jade drum that just so happens to be born this way." Han Sen nodded. He was very happy about this find. Normal jade drums could reach the class of king, but if this one was born a king, it might eventually reach a deified status. Even if that wasn't possible, it could surely become half-deified. There were many races that were considered to be higher races. Usually, that claim depended on having one half-deified elite to maintain their position. Han Sen stopped talking. He gripped his ghost teeth knife and returned to digging out the blood scorpion jade drum. He had only gone there to help out Huang Fujing, and he never expected to get something so nice for himself. Good people receive good rewards. I need to do more nice things then, huh? Han Sen mumbled as he kept digging through the stone. The rock was too hard though. Han Sen had to exhaust a lot of his energy, and he was breaking his hands in his attempt to dig out the blood scorpion jade drum. This drum was a little smaller than the other jade drums they had collected. It was only the size of 2 adult fists. Both of its sides showed that red scorpion symbol, and it looked as if there was a red scorpion alive inside it. The side of the drum was inscribed with a number of additional red symbols. Again, they were different than anything that might appear on an ordinary jade drum. Han Sen lifted it in his hands, and he was delighted. He gathered up power and hit the jade drum. Pat! What was emitted was not the sound of a drum. Han Sen hit the drum, and the drum actually ricocheted the power back towards Han Senator. It put him in immediate pain. It doesn't work. Han Sen wasn't about to give up that easily though. To gain the drum's approval, Han Sen had to display his power for it. Han Sun gathered up his jade skin power and struck the surface of the drum again. Pat. The drum didn't move or release any real sound. There was just the dull thud of Han Sen's hand striking something solid. Han Sun did not want to give up. He used all his power to hit the jade drum. He tried to hit it, poke it, and slap it. But that jade drum seemed like it was muted. It wouldn't work for him, no matter what he tried. Visit website our list novel. Now Han Sun was feeling depressed. If he wanted to take the jade drum back with him, he'd need to gain its approval. If he didn't earn its approval, the 1,000 treasures wouldn't let him take it away with him. Pang! A big explosion sounded in Han Sen's ear. It almost made him collapse. He turned around to see Bauer laying into the jade drum. Dong! 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 Bauer was having a lot of fun playing with it. She even played a song called General. She might have been having a lot of fun, but Han Sun and Huang Fujing weren't. They were struggling not to vomit. Han Sun quickly picked up Bauer and put the drum away. Bauer, play this one as well. Han Sun moved Bauer the blood scorpion jade drum, while he himself moved to the white jade drum to see if he could play that. The blood scorpion jade drum might be too high level. This jade drum looks good at least. It could be a duke. And there's always the chance it might be king class, Han Sun thought. He doubted that Bauer would succeed. But if she did, that would be fine. Han Sun had confidence. When he patted the drum though, he felt a pain. Pat. After that little sound, the white jade drum made no more noise. He gathered up more and more power, and he kept hitting it. And despite his continued pounding, the white jade drum made no noise for him no matter what he did. Han Sun was left clutching the white jade drum with feelings of depression. Then he thought to himself, Bauer played the general song. Does claiming the drum require you to use a sonic power? The theory intrigued him. He tried to remember a particular song, and then he used his fist like a hammer, and followed the melody of that song while he hit the drum. Dong! 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 He repeated the general, which Bauer had played earlier, but not to the same quality. Han Sun played it so badly that his hands ended up getting swollen. But again, the white jade drum made no additional sound. All that was heard was the pounding of his fists. Do I have bad rhythm? There is no way I cannot earn its approval. Especially since this is my luck, I'm talking about it. Let me try another song. Han Sun quickly tried a different song. And then he focused all his power back into his fists. Dong! 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 The sound of striking steel was heard. After a few more tries, Han Sun's hands felt like they were on the verge of breaking. If that happened, he'd be disabled. Han Sun was rubbing his fists in a bout of fierce depression. But all of a sudden, he heard the sound of a drum. As the noise rolled over him, it felt as if a steel rod had been shoved down through the top of his head and out his butthole. Pang! Han Sun fell down onto the ground, coughing up blood. His head was buzzing, as if something was grinding it. His organs were all damaged. His body was stronger than a pure dragon's, but not even he could stand the strength of that drum sound. Huang Fujing wasn't doing much better. Blood was leaking past her lips in thin trails. Bauer was shocked, and she immediately let go of the jade drum she was holding. She went over to Han Sun and held his head. She shouted at him. She had just randomly struck the blood scorpion jade drum, because she was bored. She never expected it to injure Han Sun and Huang Fujing. Bauer, are you trying to kill your daddy? Han Sun pulled himself off the ground with immense pain in his head. He couldn't think straight. Sorry, Dad. I just randomly hit it. Bauer said innocently. Luckily, your strike was light. If you had used more strength, we'd be dead right now. Han Sun said, while picking up Huang Fujing. It was fortunate their injuries weren't lasting. They recovered with their Geno arts, but they had realized just how scary that blood scorpion jade drum was. I'll take you guys back for now, then return here myself. There has to be some way that I can make a noise with this thing. Han Sun reached out his hand and pointed at the blood scorpion jade drum. Han Sun summoned his Destiny's Tower from his Sea of Soul and tried putting the drum in there for future investigation. Because each person could only take one drum out, and only Huang Fujing and Bauer having been accepted by a drum, there was one left over. so Han Sun had to hide it. But when Destiny's tower covered the drum suddenly made a noise and flashed brightly. A sonic force pressed against Destiny's tower, pushing it back into Han Sen's Sea of Soul. Damn, it won't go in? Han Sen's face changed, and blood dripped from the corner of his mouth. He looked at the blood scorpion jade drum in shock. Chapter 2200 Violent Approval. Han Sun frowned. He had tried using his Destiny's tower to try to claim the other jade drum, but it did not work. This is bad. If I am unable to make a sound with the jade drum, I will have no choice but to leave it here. Han Sun felt bad about this, but he was short on time. Queen had less than a day. If she didn't register her own drum in time, she wouldn't be able to take it with her, even if she did have one willing to follow her. Han Sun had a tight deadline for earning the approval of the jade drum. It doesn't matter which jade drum accepts me. As long as one of them will make a sound, we can figure the rest out later, Han Sun thought to himself. He picked up the white jade drum duke. Then he gave Bauer to Huang Fujing. Take Bauer away from me. I am going to hit this drum. If it works, I don't want to bring you to any harm. Huang Fujing nodded. Then she took Bauer towards the exit. When Huang Fujing left, Han Sun brought out his demon bug by Sima. He looked at the white jade drum, then straightened his middle finger and his thumb. A gold light appeared. Han Sun couldn't rely on using luck to get the drum to obey, so he would have to rely on brute force. He actually wanted Huang Fujing to take Bauer away, because he didn't want to be seen in his dollar persona. A coin appeared in his hand. On its surface was the number 1. As time passed, the number increased in singular ticks. 2, 3, 4, 5. Saving money was working, and the number went up. With every jump in number, the force that gathered on the coin was multiplied. The white jade drum was a duke. So, Han Sun brought the coin's power up to the number 10. When that was done, he fired it at the jade drum. The coin was unleashed with the force of a meteor, and it hit the drum hard. Dong! A strong power made a very loud noise atop the white jade drum. The sound washed out of the drum like a tsunami. When it hit the gold demon bug by Sima, however, it bounced back. The sonic force inside the Bysema kept bouncing and rolling around with the echo. It was getting stronger. Han Sun was inside all that sonic force, but he was not hurt. He had struck the white jade drum brutally and gotten its approval. The way he had gone about it was just a little violent, but the white jade drum's power did not hurt him, because it had accepted him. But after the results of the blow surprised Han Senator, the sonic power inside the demon bug by Sima was increasing. It reminded Han Sun of White Real's echo ability. He had once joked that if he had a big bell to trap his enemies, he could use echo to increase sonic powers in the confined space. The demon bug by Sima might not have been a bell, but it had been proven to be able to trap an enemy. On top of that, echo seemed to work inside it. I have only been thinking about the demon bug by Sima's ability to protect me, and so I've been overlooking an incredible opportunity. I should really go back to Sky Palace and learn echo from White Real. Using echo and the jade drum in combination could work very well, Han Sun thought to himself. The white jade drum, after that manic and violent display, gave its approval to Han Senator. When Han Sun tried to confirm this and hit it again, it was a much simpler affair. By just hitting it lightly, the drum now made a sound and emitted sonic powers. Sometimes violence really does work more than reason. Han Sun chuckled as he put away the white jade drum. Then he looked at the blood scorpion jade drum. Let's see if I can take this one with me. Han Sun brought out a coin and began gathering up power again. When the number ticked its way up to 10, he fired the coin at the drum. Dong! The coin hit the drum's surface. A metal noise sounded. He wasn't able to make it respond with a proper drum sound. The coin was stuck to the blood scorpion jade drum, but it wasn't having any amazing effects. The drum wasn't being crushed, not that he wanted that. Han Sun didn't want the drum to get damaged, of course. Reaching the number 10 with saving money is all I can do. Even if I can take it further, that won't be much of an increase. It looks like this thing really is king class. My power isn't enough to make a sound. Despite his failure, Han Sun wasn't disappointed. He only wanted to take the blood scorpion jade drum away with him, so he could have the time to claim it in the future. Han Sen thought for a moment, then cut his finger. He melted his crystal blood and dropped a little onto the blood scorpion jade drum. He saw the blood slowly melted into the scorpion symbol. But still, it took a while to absorb. But it actually was absorbing, although it hadn't melted completely into the symbol just yet. There was a weird red spot on the scorpion's back. It didn't match with the image. If blood is able to melt into it, then I'm sure I will be able to infect it. That would make gaining the drum's approval far easier, Han Sen thought to himself. He took the 2 jade drums with him as he left the cave. He went looking for Bauer and Huang Fujing. Now that Han Sen had the white jade drum's approval, the 3 of them could each take a drum and leave. After Han Sen found them, they all headed for the 1,000 treasures base that was located on the planet. He wanted to leave with the jade drums as soon as he could. Han Sen knew that it was exceedingly rare for 3 people to appear with jade drums all at once, and that made him certain that the trip home wouldn't be a safe one. Han Sen was not afraid of trouble, of course. If he had been, he wouldn't have come in the first place. But this wasn't just any trouble. This had the potential to be big trouble. 3 jade drums might entice many Sonic practicing elites into coming after them. Any enemies that started hunting them would have to be dealt with. In the planet Jade Drum's base, a half-humanoid and half-snake Ghana king was in the middle of registering his claim on a gold drum. All the elites standing around were looking jealous of the Ghana king, who was registering the highly coveted gold drum. The Ghana king wasn't happy with his prize, however. In fact, he looked rather glum. His target had been a jade drum, but after 10 days of searching, he had only managed to find a gold drum. That wasn't what he wanted, and it made him ill. A beautiful man with butterfly wings walked in front of the Ghana and laughed. "Steven, I see that you found a gold drum. Sonic Butterfly King, didn't you just get a gold drum as well?" Steven looked at his gold drum and smiled. Sonic Butterfly King sighed and said, "This planet still has jade drums, but too many people are digging for them. They are being taken faster than they are being birthed. They aren't easy to find anymore." Published at 2nd of May, 2020, 5 o'clock and 5 seconds AM. Chapter 2201. 2201 Chapter 2201 3 Jade Drums, Sponsored Content. Steven and Sonic Butterfly King kept talking as they completed their registration. Even kings had to follow the rules of the 1,000 treasures. The 1,000 treasures rarely had any conflict with those of other races, but their powers most certainly positioned them in the top 10 races of the universe. Many suspected they could easily land a spot in the top 5. Steven and Sonic Butterfly King readied themselves to leave, when suddenly a man and a woman entered the base. With them was a little girl. The 2 kings frowned upon seeing them. They hadn't noticed that the man was Han Sen, but they felt the presence of the jade drum that Huang Fujing was carrying. They frowned at her sternly. Since they had to register their drums, there was no point in trying to hide what they had found. And in regards to the 1,000 treasures, they wouldn't help a customer hide their jade drum, either. The 1,000 treasures wanted the universe to know every time someone found a jade drum on planet Jade Drum. It would be very good for their business. So Han Sen and Huang Fujing carried their jade drums openly. Since they were going to register their drums, they didn't have to hide their identities either. Every jade drum claimed would be advertised. So, Han Sen took Huang Fujing to register their findings right away. Sonic Butterfly King and Steven saw Han Sen, and Huang Fujing approached the registration booth. They kept staring at Huang Fujing's bag. They could sense the jade drum inside, but they knew they couldn't be 100% certain. That's what it was until they saw it. When Huang Fujing took her jade drum out of her bag, the kings sucked in a sharp breath of air. A jade drum? That's a jade drum. Those of the other races saw Huang Fujing reveal a jade drum, and many of them couldn't keep themselves from shouting. It has been a year since the last jade drum was found. Download our sponsor's game and get $30 reward. Remove ads. Look at her presents. She is a marquise at the very most. I can't believe she was lucky enough to find one of those legendary jade drums. Haha. Is this good luck or bad? It will be difficult to determine. Things don't always go well for a marquise who finds a jade drum. All the kings were talking quietly amongst themselves. The workers in the base were just as surprised to see the jade drum, as well. But they still registered it to her like it was nothing out of the ordinary. Doing business with the 1,000 treasures was reliable. They had even sold deified treasures before. Nothing bad ever happened in one of their places of business. They wouldn't try anything underhanded to attempt to secure a jade drum. They followed their procedures and protocol as was customary. Huang Fujing handed in her access ticket, then struck her jade drum. After the registration was complete, the jade drum was confirmed to be an official possession of hers. Stephen could not help himself from walking over to Huang Fujing and asking, "Friend, are you selling that jade drum of yours?" "Sorry, I don't plan on selling it," Huang Fujing said. She was just an earl. A duke jade drum could be very beneficial to her, and it would be much safer for her to explore with it in tow. Killing xenogenics would be much easier as well. Huang Fujing had no intention of selling it. Of course, that was also because no king planned on attacking her just yet. Stephen frowned, but he wasn't going to give up so easily. He went on to say, "Do not reject my request just yet. I am Stephen from the Naga. Give me your sum. Name any price. I won't try to haggle you for a bargain." Sorry. Huang Fujing did not move a muscle, save to give him her quick answer of no. Download our sponsor's game and get $30 reward. Remove ads. Stephen's face looked dire. So Sonic Butterfly King came forward and said, "Kid, it won't be easy to look after a jade drum. I can trade you my Duke Class 8 Sonic Butterfly for it. And on top of that, I will keep you safe. What do you say to that?" Sorry. Huang Fujing's answer was still the same cold response. "If you do not sell it right now, you will regret it the moment you set foot off of planet Jade Drum. But by then, it will be too late. If you want to sell it, now is your chance." Sonic Butterfly King's face did not change during his speech. He smiled. Huang Fujing ignored him and stepped away. Sonic Butterfly King started to step closer to tell her something else, but Han Sun walked in front of him and said, "My friend told you she isn't interested in selling it. Please ask someone else." Sonic Butterfly King's expression turned to stone. "How dare you interrupt my talk with her?" Han Sun shrugged silently. He moved to the registry booth and revealed his own jade drum. Another jade drum. Everyone in the base was shocked. No one could have expected that 2 jade drums would be found on the same day. Sonic Butterfly King was flabbergasted. He did not expect Han Sun to have a white jade drum as well. The workers looked very surprised. They completed the registration for Han Sun, indicating it now officially belonged to him. "Are you selling your jade drum? What I promised her will still apply to you, if you are willing to engage in such a transaction." Sonic Butterfly King looked right at Han Sun when he spoke. "Download our sponsor's game and get $30 reward. Remove ads." Han Sun ignored him, which prompted Stephen to follow up. He said, "Friend, if you are selling the jade drum, I will pay a high price and keep you safe. You can name your price. Anything you wish." "Sorry, but I have made no plans to sell it," Han Sun answered, rejecting his offer. Sonic Butterfly King looked gloomy, but before he said anything further, his eyes opened wide. He saw Han Sun bring out another jade drum. This jade drum looked very strange. There were some red symbols across it, and it looked very different from the average jade drum. "It's another jade drum. How is that possible? Damn, it looks like they are together. They found 3 jade drums. Did they find a special jade drum mine? This luck is truly crazy. They have managed to obtain 3 jade drums. That third jade drum looks wrong though. It's different than a normal one. It cannot be a mutant one, can it? If it is a mutant jade drum, then it will be worth a lot. We know that normal jade drums can become king class, but a mutant jade drum might go even higher. That is extremely lucky. It is too lucky. I'm sure such luck will result in a disaster for them shortly. They look low level, but they have each earned a jade drum. Oof. They are very dead. That is not luck. That is pure danger. Download our sponsor's game and get $30 reward. Remove ads." As everyone discussed this, Stephen and Sonic Butterfly King stared at the blood scorpion jade drum, seething with greed. They didn't even blink. The mutant jade drum was so exceptionally rare that it wasn't seen more than once every 10,000 years. They could have been items that were higher than king class. Even king class people treated them like treasures. I am sorry, sir. According to the rules of the 1,000 treasures, every creature can only take one drum with them. You have already registered one, the worker said to Han's son. I know. This drum isn't mine. It belongs to my daughter. Han's son pointed at Bauer, and then he passed her the blood scorpion jade drum. Then we will have to see her play it, the worker said, clearly not believing Han's son. The worker looked back and forth between Bauer and the jade drum. Does she have to hit the drum here? Han's son asked. Yes, those are the rules. The worker nodded with absolute certainty. Published at 2nd of May, 2020, 5 o'clock and 5 seconds AM. Chapter 2202. 2202 Chapter 2202 The Power of a Drum. Sponsored content. My daughter cannot control the strength she uses on the drum. Will that be okay? Hansen double-checked with them. The worker laughed, pointed to the base around them, and said, the base has the appropriate equipment to absorb and sustain the sonic power. Even if a king whacked a jade drum, the excessive force would be dampened by the technology. Only a small bit of the shockwave will ultimately spread. Do not worry. And if there are any issues here at the registration booth, we will claim full responsibility. That's good. Hansen nodded. He had been afraid something terrible might happen, and he would end up being responsible for it. He had heard the blood scorpion jade drum's noise before, and he knew it was quite different from the average jade drum. An ordinary jade drum expelled its sonic powers in a wide radius without much of a focus. The blood scorpion jade drum's behavior was unique. The force lashed out in the manner of a scorpion's stinging tail. When the drum was struck, the sound was sharp and focused. It pierced right through a person. It was very difficult to describe. Bauer had struck it lackadaisically earlier, and that small blow was enough to bring Han's son and Huang Fujing to the brink of death. If Bauer hit it any harder, there was every chance someone in that establishment could die. Friends, my daughter doesn't know how to measure the strength she exerts. How about you all take a step back, in case something happens? It's so you can avoid injury. Han's son looked at the elites in the lobby. People of all different races were assembled there. If the drum killed them all, it would mean Han's son had caused a grievous offense to each of the races. It's a drum. Just hit it. Why must you keep talking? All the people present were very skilled at sonic powers already, so they were all very eager to see the blood scorpion jade drum's power. They weren't willing to just leave on a whim. If you guys don't want to leave, then you may want to take some measure to protect yourselves. Don't take it out on us if you end up getting hurt after a fair warning, Han's son said. Who will take it out on you for this? We might take something else out on you for talking constant crap and not getting a move on. Hit it now or put the jade drum down and get lost. Many of the elites were growing annoyed with the delays. Download our sponsor's game and get $30 reward. Remove ads? Well, I warned you. All I can say is look after yourselves. Han's son set Bauer down by the drum, and then retreated. He summoned his Baisima around himself, Huang Fujing, the worker, and the registry booth. Then he blinked to Bauer, who was still outside of the Baisima. Bauer, hit it. But don't hit it too hard. Han's son shielded the worker, because he was genuinely afraid that the man wouldn't be able to withstand the hit. The drum couldn't be registered if the person who was supposed to register it died. Everyone saw Han's son taking this so seriously, and they started to appear a little confused. The worker said that there was equipment in place to ventilate excess sonic powers. They were designed to deal exclusively with the power of the drums. Even if a king-class elite struck a drum, nothing much would happen. The blood scorpion jade drum was a mutant jade drum. Yes, but if a mere child was going to strike it, that shouldn't have posed much of an issue. That was what the onlookers were thinking, anyway, as they saw Bauer standing over the jade drum. Then she hit it. Pang! The small hand came down on the drum, and a very low boom sounded. Before anyone could react, they all felt as if steel rods had been driven down into their heads. BZT. Everyone's head buzzed, and their bodies felt like they were being impaled. No one present could keep their bodies composed. and they collapsed to writhe and convulse on the ground. It was like they were having a stroke. They began to froth at the mouth, and many of their bladders let loose. The entire lobby began to stink, as a whole bunch of nobles began rolling around on the ground and soiling themselves. Download our sponsor's game and get $30 reward. Remove ads. Sonic Butterfly King and Steven believed themselves to be Sonic elites, and there was Sonic absorption equipment installed there. They hadn't taken any measures to protect themselves. They had no idea that the Blood Scorpion Jade Drum would pose that big of a threat when compared to the average Jade Drum. When the strange drum sounded, they didn't even see the sonic ripples assault them. The sonic needles didn't give them time to block. Their brains no longer functioned correctly, and they collapsed to wriggle and roll across the floor. Although they weren't in as bad shape as the dukes and marquises, they still felt as if their heads were about to explode. They couldn't think straight, and they couldn't even lift themselves up off the floor. Hansen thought he'd end up killing someone, but it looked as if no one had actually died. Their heads had been hit fiercely though, so he did not think anyone would be recovering for quite some time. It looked like the Blood Scorpion Jade Drum's power didn't actually kill those it affected. It just messed with their brains and left them incredibly dazed. Hansen kept thinking that such a weapon was perfect for him. And while all those people were still disoriented, Hansen could take Huang Fujing and Bauer to leave safely. You guys said the 1,000 treasures would bear the responsibility for anything bad that might happen. Can we register this item now? Hansen shook the worker to rouse him and get his attention. The man was still frozen in disbelief. The worker looked very surprised by the events that had just transpired. He watched the nobles rolling around on the floor. While they might have looked very elegant only moments before, they now looked filthy with all the bodily deposits they were rolling in. Their prior cockiness had quickly evaporated. Even Sonic Butterfly King and Steven, they were mumbling something about being dizzy and needing to sit on the floor, but they couldn't help but touch the waste unleashed by the other nobles. Download our sponsor's game and get $30 reward. Remove ads. What are you waiting for? Hurry up and get this thing registered. Hansen stared down at the worker. The worker snapped out of his daze, as if he had just woken from a dream. Then he went to register the Blood Scorpion Jade Drum. After that, Hansen took his companions and departed. The Blood Scorpion Jade Drum was strong, but that was because Sonic Butterfly King and the others hadn't bothered to prepare any defenses. Now that they knew what to expect, it would be harder to use the Blood Scorpion Jade Drum on them again. Clients weren't permitted to kill anyone on planet Jade Drum. Being wanted by the 1,000 treasures would be bad. Hansen needed to put as much distance as he could between himself and the people who had just been dazed while they were still unable to follow. Hansen took Bauer away from planet Jade Drum and thought to himself, the Blood Scorpion Jade Drum's dazing powers are strong. Even the kings were affected by it. I really need to get its approval, so I can use it for myself in the universe. If I use that on an enemy, I can do whatever I want to them. 10 minutes after leaving planet Jade Drum, Sonic Butterfly King and Steven started to regain their senses. Their heads, however, were in agony. Sonic Butterfly King ignored his own discomfort. He stood up, with his hand clutching his head. He asked the worker, which way did they go? They have now left planet Jade Drum. Where exactly they went I do not know, the worker said. Sonic Butterfly King wouldn't dare attack the people of the 1,000 treasures. While holding their heads, they left planet Jade Drum in the hope of finding their escapees. After 10 minutes of searching, they were unable to find Hansen, and they had no clue in which direction he might have fled. Download our sponsor's game and get $30 reward. Remove ads. Sonic Butterfly King flew out of planet Jade Drum, his body still shivering. He had a pounding headache that was worse than a heavy hangover. Steven followed. He was in the same state, and he didn't find any trace of Hansen's group either. They were lucky that their king-class bodies could withstand what they had just endured. The dukes and marquises were sure to be out of commission for another few days. Their heads felt as if they were going to explode. Chapter 2203 Shadow Toxic Bee Enclave. Hansen took Huang Fujing back with him to planet Eclipse. She had just earned her own Jade Drum, And since she was worried about being ambushed while out and about, she wanted to stay there for some time. She would wait until things settled down before moving on. Sonic Butterfly King had learned where Han Sun came from, but it would be pointless to go after Han Sun when he was already so far behind. He managed to get in touch with people to block Han Sun's way, but they were unable to find him either. So eventually Sonic Butterfly King decided to give up. After all, they couldn't go into Narrow Moon to find him. They couldn't risk offending the rebate. On his way back, Han Sun dropped a few droplets of his own blood onto the Blood Scorpion Jade Drum. He hoped to earn the Jade Drum's approval gradually. In Planet Eclipse's base, people were in the middle of practice when a sudden report was received. Someone came running in, telling them of an army of Xenogeneics converging on their position. Han Menger, Zero Little Angel, and Han Yin went out to take a look. There, they found a mountain that was swarmed with what appeared to be red clouds. The clouds were heading toward the base so quickly that they'd arrive in only a little while. The red clouds weren't clouds, of course. They were swarms of red bees that were each the size of a dog. They were very powerful, and the sight made Han Yin frown. When did Planet Eclipse come to possess Xenogeneics such as this? I have never seen them before. As this occurred, Night River King was watching Planet Eclipse's base. His expression looked venomous, and he said, "Shadow Queen Bees are special Xenogeneics that come from Planet Queen Bee. They are only dukes, but they sure breed quickly. If there's enough food, she can make lower-level shadow bees. But that primary shadow queen a mutant duke Xenogeneic. Aside from being able to produce shadow bees like the rest, the mutant shadow queen bee can also produce duke shadow bees. The queen didn't have much time, and it has only produced 2 thus far. But that should be enough to deal with Han Sen's base. Shadow queen bees eat the flesh of enemies and place their eggs inside the carcasses. When Han Sen returns and sees all this, the look on his face will be so sweet." Night River King gritted his teeth. Night River King wasn't worried about the consequences. A shadow queen bee was one of the Xenogeneics that escaped from the cargo ship. It would look like an accident, and no one would know that it was his fault. Even if Han Sun believed it was him, there was nothing he could do but make wild accusations. Night River King wanted this, though. He wanted Han Sun to hate him. It would be painful for Han Sun to know he couldn't do anything about that seething hatred. "This is the beginning of making me your enemy," Night River King spat. He really loathed Han Senator. The shadow bees appeared like wisps of red clouds under the command of the 2 dukes in charge of the army. They raced towards the base. Night River King was prepared to enjoy the fight, but a blue shield suddenly appeared. It enveloped the entire base and shielded it. The red clouds of shadow bees came down like a barrage against the blue shields, but a mere touch sent them blasting back. Even the 2 Duke shadow bees up front were unable to get through. Night River King's jaw tightened. He felt a little frustrated about the result, as he hadn't expected Han Sun to leave his blue shield treasure in the base. Night River King thought Han Sun would carry a defensive item, such as that everywhere he went. If he knew Han Sun hadn't taken it with him, he wouldn't have concocted the grand scheme to attack Planet Eclipse. If Han Sun didn't have the shield, fighting him one-on-one would be far easier. There was no point in wasting time on regret, though. The shadow bees were unable to break the shield. The shadow bees fired a toxic substance from their nasty stingers. They were like red lights as they splashed across the blue shield. They did nothing to harm the composition of the shield, though. Although the shield was weakened by the fact that it had to protect the entire base, it would still be very difficult for marquises and dukes to break it down. As Night River King wrestled with various ideas, the blue shield suddenly disappeared. The bees outside came racing in. Did it fail because the shield's user didn't have enough strength? Night River King wondered. Could the user not keep the shield raised? Soon after, Night River King realized that his assumption hadn't been quite right. When a fair number of those shadow bees came racing in, the shield was raised once more. Most of the shadow bees were still on the outside, but a decent chunk had made it in. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Black arrows began flying beneath the shield. Not long after, a dozen of the shadow bees on the inside were slain. And then a group of Kate appeared. They began gathering the bodies of the shadow bees inside the base. Night River King's eyes began to twitch. His plan hadn't worked, and he had just given Planet Eclipse a massive number of free xenogeneics. He wished he could go in there himself and destroy what Han Sun had built. When the Kate kids brought the Shadow Bee bodies back into the base, the shield disappeared again. It reappeared a millisecond later, shutting off another section of the Shadow Bee army. Night River King laughed. One of the Shadow Bees inside was a duke. The others were just marquises. No matter how strong they were, no one there could slay a Duke Shadow Bee. Night River King was already imagining how the Duke Shadow Bee would slaughter them all when suddenly, a black arrow came at the Duke Shadow Bee. The Duke Shadow Bee reacted quickly, far more quickly than any Marquis Shadow Bee could have managed. As the black arrow rose toward it, the bee's stinger lit up and fired a toxic squirt at the arrow. The toxic juice sprayed toward the arrow, and the arrow suddenly sank. It adjusted its course to duck under the toxic juice. Then it rose against and punched through Duke Shadow Bee's body with great speed. The Shadow Bee was shining red. When the arrow pierced its body, the arrow came to a stop. It isn't easy to kill a Duke Shadow Bee. Night River King laughed mockingly. Boom! When the arrow entered the Shadow Bee's body, it was trapped inside. But then, a scary explosion occurred within the Duke Shadow Bee's body. The red light shattered, and a gaping hole was torn in its side. It was heavily injured, and it fell to struggle on the ground. Boom! Another arrow was fired at it. It pierced through the Shadow Bee via the already dealt wound. The creature's head then blew up, bringing a swift end to the Duke Shadow Bee. While that happened, the rest of the Marquis Shadow Bees were dealt with by Han Yen. How is this possible? That woman is just a Marquise, and yet she can so simply kill a Duke Shadow Bee? This is impossible. She is Han Sen's blood. But since when have crystallizers ever been that strong? Night River King was incredibly angry, and he couldn't believe his eyes. Chapter 2204 Black Moon King visit Han Menger, and the others finished off the remainder of the Shadow Bees effortlessly. They managed to collect a lot of xenogeneic genes through the effort, and many of them earned Shadow Bee beast souls. The beast souls were arrows that wielded a toxic fire. When Han Menger killed the second Duke Shadow Bee, she earned a Duke Toxic Arrow Beast soul. When he saw the last of the Shadow Bees get destroyed, Night River King knew his plan had failed. In his rage, he smashed the screen he had been watching to pieces. After Han Sun returned to Planet Eclipse and learned of what had unfolded with the Shadow Bees, he guessed that Night River King had been behind it. Planet Eclipse did not have any Shadow Bees that were native to the place. Thank God I left the demon bug by Sima behind. Otherwise, even though Han Menger and the others would probably have survived the assault, many of my other nobles would have been killed, Han Sun thought, relieved at how things had turned out. Han Sun knew the Bee Queen was still around though. So, he assembled expeditions to go out in search of it. The Shadow Queen Bee's nest was not difficult to find. She made her home in a large mountain, and the entrances that the bees had carved were clearly visible. Many Shadow Bees had been slain only a few days prior, and the Shadow Queen Bee didn't produce Shadow Bee eggs fast enough to have replaced them yet. So, Han Sun entered the beehive easily to locate the ruby-looking Shadow Queen Bee. Han Sun perused the information he had compiled on her, and he knew exactly where she had come from. Seeing the Shadow Queen Bee now made him a happy fellow. He recognized instantly that it was a mutant Shadow Queen Bee, which was a very rare being to procure. That being said, Han Sun had already guessed that the queen would be a mutant after hearing about the dukes that had assaulted his base. But still, seeing the mutant Shadow Queen Bee in the flesh made him super happy. Dong! 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 The Shadow Queen Bee moved incredibly quickly. It flew around like a solidified shadow, leaving behind trailing shadows of its own. Her wings flapped so quickly, Han Sun could hardly keep track of her. Many toxic lights shone on her back, and they launched themselves at Han Senator, but each strike just landed on his by Sima and was rendered moot. A Duke mutant xenogeneic. So strong. This Duke's speed and the toxic light attacks, in combination with the crazy breeding speed, this would be very difficult to kill without the Demon Bug King shield. Han Sun thought to himself. The Shadow Queen Bee kept flying around Han Sun, firing her toxic darts. But against the demon bug by Sima, it was nothing. Han Sun didn't attack the creature though. He figured it would be a shame to kill the mutant Shadow Queen bee. Han Sun wanted to keep it alive so it could produce more Duke and Marquis offspring. That way, some of the scarcity of high-level resources offered by Planet Eclipse could be alleviated. So, Han Sun hadn't gone there with the intent of killing the mutant Shadow Queen bee. Instead, he wanted to take it and use it for himself. If Han Sun had been a duke, it would have been far easier for him to claim her. But he was just a marquis, and his speed and power weren't as good as hers. It would take much effort to collect her. The Shadow Queen bee launched attacks at Han Sun furiously, but they slid harmlessly off his shield. After a while, the creature exhausted itself. Her attacks became far weaker and far slower. The Shadow Queen bee wasn't an intelligent creature, and it was a very territorial being. Although it was exhausted, he was still in her nest, and she would never consider fleeing. She still tried to fight Han Senator, seeing her growing frustration. Han Sun decided to put away his demon bug by Sima. The Shadow Queen bee, upon seeing the Bysema disappear, flapped her wings to resume attacking Han Senator. She was much slower now though. Han Sun brought out his white jade drum and hit it. A very deep boom of sonic power ripped out of the drum. It clipped the tired Shadow Queen bee and brought her down. The Duke Jade drum's sound shouldn't have affected a mutant duke like her very strongly, but she was too tired by this point, so she couldn't withstand the force of that sonic shockwave. The Shadow Queen bee dragged herself off the floor. Intent on going after Han Senator, Han Sun was still holding the jade drum. He hit it another 2 times. The shockwaves made her roll and writhe around on the ground again. It looked as if she was in pain. "If you listen to my commands, I will spare your life," Han Sun told the Shadow Queen bee that was now on the ground. The Shadow Queen bee lacked intelligence. When the drum stopped, she tried to attack Han Sun again, the intruder that had invaded her space. Han Sun didn't know what to do except continue pounding the jade drum, which made her roll around on the ground over and over. Some of her bee blood began to pour from her mouth. But Han Sun didn't want to kill her. Killing her would be pointless. Seeing that the Shadow Queen bee was about to die under his repeated torture, he decided to exit the hive. A xenogeniac without proper brains had to be broken in by slow torture over time. Han Sun stationed people to keep an eye on that beehive. If the queen bee made bees, they would go and kill them. That would teach her a lesson. They hoped that after a while, she might actually listen to Han Sun and obey his commands. "We will never be safe for as long as Night River King exists," Han Sun thought grimly. He considered how he might dispose of Night River King. With the current limits of his power, Han Sun couldn't go after Night River King just yet. He needed to become a duke, and he needed to own a lot more treasures. It would have been best if he could use the Blood Scorpion Jade Drum. That would be the only weapon he'd need to take down someone that was a higher level than he was. But even if he was able to kill Night River King, he wouldn't be able to do it while he was in Narrow Moon. If they fought, the rebate would rally behind Night River King. An outsider would never earn their favor. It looks like I need to become a duke quickly and find a way to take him out elsewhere. Han Sun calmed himself down and tried to think things through rationally. Allowing his anger to make him rush wouldn't solve anything. If anything, it would just reveal weaknesses for his enemies to exploit. He needed to be calm if he was going to do this. "Night River King, I am going to kill you." Han Sun kept practicing. The 1st and 15th day of each month, he went to Cold Palace to absorb moon and cold powers, hastening his ascension to the rank of Duke. Han Sun dropped his blood onto the Blood Scorpion Jade Drum every day too, slowly letting his essence sink into it. He wanted his blood to become one with the scorpion. Han Sun felt that he was slowly building a connection with the Blood Scorpion Jade Drum, claiming it would only be a matter of time. One day, Black Moon King dropped in on Han Sun unexpectedly. "Han Sun, the Extreme King will be hiring knights from Narrow Moon. Are you interested in going?" "Extreme King recruits elites. I don't think they'd want a small marquis like me," Han Sun answered, confused. He thought they were only interested in elites like Isha. That would require him to be at least a king. The Extreme King will only grow and care for future elites that are showing great potential. We have a good relationship with them. When the Extreme King hire knights, they offer a few slots to us. If you would like to join them, I can get you in, Black Moon King said. Chapter 2205 Ice Blue Night King. Do I have to go? Han Sen asked with a frown. It is merely a recommendation of mine, Black Moon said quietly. But the dragons don't tend to swim with fish, and tigers don't like living with dogs. This is your opportunity to get out of here. Han Sen knew Black Moon King was merely being nice to him, and he knew that the king didn't want him and Night River King to be embroiled in more fights. But Han Sen still shook his head and told him, "Thank you for your kindness, but if I cannot stand my ground here, how will I make it where I want to go in the future? I know you aren't the sort of person that gives up easily." Black Moon King wished to say something more, but he faltered. Then he just stopped and sighed. Never mind. The road everyone traverses is different, and it's impossible to determine which road is right for anyone else. If this is your desire, then we can let this matter be. Black Moon King then left, which got Han Sen to thinking. Extreme King seems to be going on a hiring spree lately. Has some internal affair gotten out of hand? Han Sen had no information pertaining to them, so he couldn't guess anything more. He continued to practice jade skin every day, hoping to become a duke as soon as he could. On that day, everyone in Narrow Moon assembled in Moon God Plaza. They were all dressed in their finest uniforms, which suggested they were meeting with someone important. Han Sen did not go to the plaza, but he knew that was the day when the Extreme King were coming. He saw some ships that were as pretty as planets coming into Narrow Moon airspace. It looks like Extreme King doesn't only focus on heightened strength. Even their technology is far more advanced. Narrow Moon doesn't have a single ship like that. And there they are with an entire fleet of the things. Thank God they aren't enemies. If they were, Narrow Moon would swiftly fall, Han Sen murmured to himself. Han Sen didn't want to join the Extreme King, but everyone else in Narrow Moon wished to. The Extreme King weren't willing to take just anyone, however. Each candidate had to go through a thorough testing process. Many nobles anticipated this opportunity, hoping they could send their kids sent with the Extreme King. Any young students that joined them were sure to develop and become stronger. The rebate were a higher race, but they weren't even in the top 100. In terms of resources and strength, they paled in comparison to the Extreme King. It was a shame that the standards of the Extreme King were very high. Joining them was harder than passing any school exam, and many creatures were quick to fail their testing process. Narrow Moon was just one of the string of stops that the Extreme King were making along their recruitment drive. In total, there were at least 1,000 other places where they intended to recruit people, just as they were doing in Narrow Moon. They wouldn't be taking anyone who didn't pass their tests, however. Although Han Sen did not participate in the testing, he learned that over the past 4 days, only one earl and one marquise had passed the bar of quality. Countless young people were not permitted to join. The Extreme King were recruiting backup knights. Their level did not matter. All that mattered was their current talent and their potential for the future. So, even some so-called genius dukes of the rebate were booted from the tests. Moonwool King, I have heard Knife had a student. Which one is he? Asked Ice Blue Night King with a frown. He was in charge of the Narrow Moon recruitment drive. There were 10 groups of knights in Extreme King. Every group of knights had one leader who was a Night King. Ice Blue Night King was the leader of the Ice Blue Knights. When they assigned the different areas the night groups would visit to recruit, Ice Blue Night King selected Narrow Moon purposely. He had to pay a price for that as well. He did this because Knife Queen herself had joined the Ice Blue Knights when she came to the Extreme King. Ice Blue Night King greatly admired Knife Queen. He even followed her instructions. That was why he had selected Narrow Moon, for that was where she came from. He hoped to find similar geniuses there. But over the past 2 days, the tests had greatly disappointed him. The young rebates really did lack talent. At the very least, they were nowhere near the greatness of Knife Queen herself. Although a few of the talented ones were good enough, their personalities were abhorrent. It'd be difficult to give them any glimmer of fame. And while at first Ice Blue Night King had been happy to come to Narrow Moon, he was no longer enjoying himself. Ice Blue Night King remembered Knife Queen mentioning that she had a student, so the Night King wondered why he hadn't seen the young man. If that person could become her student, he must have been something special. Moonwheel King hesitated a moment, but he smiled and said, Knife does have a student, but only one, and it is required that he carry on her legacy. And so, he has had to give up the chance to join the Ice Blue Knights. Really? Ice Blue Knight asked quietly. Night River King suddenly said, From what I have seen, if he wishes to carry on her legacy, he should join the Extreme King. Even Knife had to join the Extreme King, yes? If so, her student will have to follow her sooner or later. He is wasting his time in Narrow Moon. Why can he not go to be with the Extreme King sooner? If Knife was here today, she would think the same. Night River King did not say this on behalf of Han Senator. All he wanted to do was kick Han Sun out of Narrow Moon, so he could take the Guardian's moonlight all for himself. Ice Blue Night King agreed. Night River King is correct. A student of Knife should be someone special. He deserves better than to be stuck here in Narrow Moon. Tell him to come here and undergo the test. If he passes, I will treat him very nice for Knife's sake. Moonwheel King smiled wryly. He knew Han Sun did not want to go, but now, he couldn't disobey Ice Blue Night King's instructions. He had no choice but to call Han Sun and tell him to go to Moon God Plaza. Han Sun was practicing in his base at the time. Moonwheel King didn't want to surprise Han Sun, so he sent people to meet Han Sun in person and explain the whole thing. Their presence made Han Sun frown. Moonwheel King's guard said, You have to go no matter what. If you don't, Moonwheel King won't know how to explain the matter to Ice Blue Night King. Moonwheel King said that if you really don't want to go, then just fail the test. Even if you wanted to go, Ice Blue Night King wouldn't permit you to go if you failed. Han Sun knew that he had no choice. He followed the guards to Moon God Plaza. He knew he would have to control the breadth of his power to ensure that he didn't pass the test. He arrived in Moon God Plaza and saw many nobles queuing to conduct the test. But the guards didn't put him in the queue. They escorted him straight up to Ice Blue Night King. You are Knife Queen's student? Upon seeing Han Sun, Ice Blue Night King looked surprised. He had expected Knife student to be a rebate. Yes, I am Han Senior. Han Sun bowed. Chapter 2206 Faking the Test. Over the past few centuries, the Extreme King had put much of their focus on the systems of chaos. The Ice Blue Knights were pioneers, and their primary killing fields were those dangerous systems. They knew little about matters concerning other places in the universe. Because of this, they were unaware of who Han Sun was. The Extreme King did have an information-gathering department, so they did know a thing or two about Han Senator, but the Extreme King thought only people like Moonwheel King or Isha were worth focusing on. Not many people knew Night River King at all. The only people that cared for that sort of information were the locals of Narrow Moon. Ice Blue Night King only knew that Isha had a student. He didn't know that person's name or race. He had just assumed that her student would be a rebate, not a crystallizer. Ice Blue Night King didn't say much to Han Sun, and he simply encouraged him to engage in the test. Although Ice Blue Night King really admired Knife Queen, he wouldn't go easy on her student. To gain his approval, Han Sun would have to demonstrate an appropriately impressive amount of power. But because of his experience with Isha, Ice Blue Night King remained hopeful that Han Sun would succeed. Mr. White, what do you think about Knife student? Ice Blue Night King looked at a man in green clothing standing beside him. The man squinted as he peered at Han Sun and said, He is an interesting man. Well, after all, the student of Knife Queen should be at least half decent. If he wasn't, he would not have been selected by a woman like her. Ice Blue Knight said with absolute confidence. The green-clothed Mr. White didn't answer. He merely smiled and kept his eyes on the test. Han Sun was in the marquee's queue. He was watching the kings perform their test, thinking of a way in which he might get himself disqualified, without looking like he was intentionally throwing the test. It wasn't as if he didn't want to go to the Extreme King. It was just that he had many problems already in Narrow Moon. Leaving Han Menger there alone with Night River King would be a risky thing to do. Han Sun wanted to take out Night River King before he left Narrow Moon. So Han Sun planned to stay. After watching for a while, Han Sun had an idea of how he might sneak his way past the test. The most annoying thing, though, would be the Geno tree test. That test was way too straightforward. The flowers opened up in accordance with how much power one had. People could see the results easily. Han Sun was far stronger than the average marquis. Even if he performed poorly in the other tests, dropping some blood on the tree would guarantee a flower boom that far exceeded anyone else there. Cheating on the other tests would be rendered pointless. Fortunately, Han Sun had a way to deal with the tree, so he wasn't too worried. When it was almost Han Sun's turn, Night River King cockily said, now he has to go. That means I have Cold Palace all to myself." The tests at each level were different. A Marquise's first challenge was a combat test. He had to fight and defeat a machine robot. That robot had been created by a Duke Knight. Its strength would be Marquise level, so it would adequately test combat skills at that rank. The scoring system went up to 100, and if you wanted to pass, you'd have to beat the 90-point mark. The tests would continue even if the examinee failed one, though. Each test would have to be gone through for proper evaluation. People that performed some tests poorly could still be selected. With Han Sen's level of power, the people of Narrow Moon thought he could defeat the machine with great ease. But when Han Sun started to fight, the mouths of all the kings were left wide open. Moonwheel King himself was particularly shocked. Lit. Fucking lit. Han Sen's fight with the doll was like the greatest fight of all time. If the audience hadn't known Han Sen's real power, they'd have been very moved. Han Sun seemed like someone who had fantastic endurance, but not enough strength. He kept on fighting and fighting, even if he failed. He worked his way against the enemy, without any fear of how difficult it might be. While Han Sun would bleed, he would not cry. And eventually, he did defeat his foe. He won the fight. It was just done in a movie-like way that was sure to encourage others. When Han Sun beat the robot, many lovely female nobles had tears in their eyes. They almost shouted out, "Han Sun, you are the best." But the people in Narrow Moon who actually knew Han Sun had strange expressions on their faces. Han Sun was a man who treated Night River King like an annoying dog. He had beaten dragons. He was regarded as being on the same level as Lone Bamboo. But now, seeing him struggle to fight a mere Marquise robot made the onlookers think that something was wrong with their eyes. Asshole! That asshole! This is too much. Night River King seethed as he watched Han Sen's performance. But then he calmed himself down. Yes, keep acting. Let's see if you can trick the Geno tree into blooming with fewer flowers. As he watched the fight, Ice Blue Night King frowned. He asked Moonwheel King, "Is he really Knife Queen's student?" Moonwheel King coughed and smiled. He has just become a Marquise, so he is not in his best shape. He works hard, but he is grossly underpowered. How did Knife teach him? After seeing Han Sun use teeth knife, Ice Blue Night King thought his performance of it was terrible. Knife was busy much of the time. She sent him to Sky Palace for a while. Moonwheel King felt depressed. Ice Blue Night King stopped his line of questioning. He watched Han Sen's performance, and concluded that Knife must have had her reasons for taking Han Sun as a student. He believed Han Sun must have been strong in another way. The tests of the Extreme King were very scientific, and they could accurately gauge anyone's potential. The tests could show the extent of a person's talents. But Han Sen's performances were driving the people of Narrow Moon nuts. They knew some of Han Sen's true abilities. They knew how scary he could be. But now he looked like a man that worked hard and had no real talent. He worked very hard, but his results were terrible. Moonwheel King's expression was becoming increasingly strained. It was difficult to avoid laughing when looking at his pinched face. It looks like Knife didn't have a replacement. Ice Blue Night King sighed. Han Sun seemed well behaved, and it looked like he worked very hard. His talents, however, were downright terrible. Night River King only laughed at Han Sun coldly, without saying a word. He wanted to see how Han Sun planned to make it past the Geno tree. The results given by the Geno tree were always accurate, so his act wouldn't pay off. Taking the Geno tree test would reveal the true extent of his power. Perhaps it would make Ice Blue Night King angry. Chapter 2207 Test Results. The final test was the Geno tree. Han Sun stood before it and cut his finger. He let a droplet of blood fall onto the Geno tree. As everyone watched Han Sun's blood fall onto the Geno tree, Night River King stared at Han Sun intently. He wanted to make sure that Han Sun didn't try to cheat his way through this too. The Geno tree could accurately gauge one's Geno power. It was very precise. If Han Sun let his own blood fall onto the Geno tree, it would bloom with a number of flowers that was equal to his strength. Han Sun had spent some time researching the Geno tree, and he had discovered some interesting things. The operation of the Geno tree turned out to be quite simple. The Geno tree was like a gasoline-operated generator, and the genes in a person's blood were like gas. The more gene power a person's blood possessed, the more electricity the Geno tree could generate. In the case of the tree, there'd be more flowers. Han Sun's Geno power was much stronger than the average marquise's. Ordinary marquises could generate up to 100,000 flowers. Han Sun believed his own power would easily open a few 100,000 flowers. If Han Sun wanted to be disqualified, he would have to reduce the number of flowers that bloomed. This was a task that no ordinary creature could accomplish, because success wouldn't depend on strength. Even deified elites couldn't change their own genes. Or at least, if people like that did exist, there were very few of them. When the deified Buddha called Burning Lamp Alpha had turned Han Sun into an ant, he had demonstrated a rare gene-changing power. Han Sun's Blood Pulse Sutra could change the messaging of genes, but Burning Lamp Alpha's Geno art was quite different. The Blood Pulse Sutra primarily controlled its own genes. It couldn't change the genes of another creature, like Burning Lamp Alpha's shapeshifting technique. It wasn't difficult for Han Sun to use the Blood Pulse Sutra to control the genes in his own blood. He had tried doing this once before. Night River King watched Han Sun's drop of blood fall onto the tree, and when that occurred, life crept over the barren tree as flowers began to bloom. As the flowers grew, it was like watching a wind rustle through a meadow of a few thousand flowers. But when the flowers stopped blooming, Night River King's eyes opened wide. He screamed, "A mere 10,000 flowers? Impossible!" There was no way that Han Sun's blood would only produce 10,000 blooms. Even the weakest marquise could earn 10,000 flowers. But everyone knew that not even the strongest rebate marquises could defeat Han Sun in combat. Ice Blue Night King didn't look surprised. After all, the results aligned with the results of the other tests. Ice Blue Night King thought Knife Queen must have taken Han Sun as a student because of his work ethic, but his talents and powers were still poor. No matter which way you cut it, the sole purpose of the Ice Blue Knights was to fight. They were not a school, so Ice Blue Night King gave up on the prospect of hiring Han Senator if Han Sun lacked power. Then it didn't matter if he was Knife Queen's student. The Night King wouldn't allow any talentless person to join the Ice Blue Knights. It would be irresponsible to the other knights he commanded, and on top of that, it could put Han Sun himself in danger. Seeing Han Sun walk away from the testing platform, Night River King looked sick. He firmly believed Han Sun had cheated. Even so, he watched Han Sun's blood fall on the tree with his own eyes. He knew there should have been no way for Han Sun to cheat. His face turned red in frustration, as he thought furiously of ways that he might stop Han Senator. He didn't dare to declare that Han Sun was cheating though. Saying something like that would draw too much attention. If he asked for Han Sun to be tested again, and Han Sun was able to do the same trick that proved he wasn't cheating, then Night River King would be showing disrespect to Ice Blue Night King. Moonwool King was shocked too. He didn't know how Han Sun had deceived the Geno tree. Han Sun meanwhile acted depressed. He looked up to the skies and let out an elongated sigh. He left the platform with slumped shoulders and returned to Planet Eclipse. On the way, he thought with satisfaction, "Now I don't need to go to the Extreme King." The final tests of the day ended. In the end, only 2 of the rebate had managed to pass. But Ice Blue Night King wasn't happy about this. After perusing the day's reports, he sighed. "Why do you sigh?" Mr. White asked Ice Blue Night King with a smile. Ice Blue Night King displayed a wry smile. "I can barely believe that a person like Knife Queen was willing to take a student like that. So ends the lineage of Teeth Knife. I will never watch that incredible knife skill get used again." Mr. White smiled and said, "If you're feeling sad about that, there is no need." "What do you mean?" Ice Blue Night King asked in confusion. Mr. White smiled and said, "That is because Knife Queen has an excellent student. He might one day surpass the woman herself." Ice Blue Night King stared at Mr. White blankly. Surely Mr. White couldn't have been complimenting Han's son on the terrible exhibition they had both just witnessed. "You mean she has another student?" Ice Blue Night King asked, grasping for an explanation. "Come and take a look at this." Mr. White gestured to a monitor that was scrolling through data. As Ice Blue Night King looked at the screen, the expression on his face slowly morphed. After a while, he raised his head and squinted his eyes at Mr. White. "I got played. Han's son had trained in Sky Palace, fought the greatest marquise there, and been labeled the knife and sword master. There was no way he only possessed 10,000 flowers of strength. Sky Palace could never have gained such fame if it produced students as weak as that." Mr. White thought for a moment and said, "Maybe he has his own troubles that are keeping him from coming along with us freely. I don't care what his reasons are. He is mine." Ice Blue Night King grunted. But after a while he smiled and said, "This guy is good. He had me completely fooled. His personality is different than Knife's, that's for sure. I am surprised she selected a student such as that. Let's find out why he doesn't want to join the Ice Blue Knights first," Mr. White said. "That's simple. We'll just ask him," Ice Blue Night King said with a shrug. Together, Ice Blue Night King and Mr. White snuck onto Planet Eclipse. There, they found Han's son hosting a barbecue in the company of many ladies and beasts. He was talking and laughing with those around him, and he didn't look sad at all. It looked like a party. Chapter 2208. The conditions for joining Han's son was indulging himself with quality drinks and food hot off the grill. But he suddenly looked up and let his face go blank. Something powerful was coming his way, and it extinguished the fire in a single moment. Not even smoke was left to rise from the ashes. "Han son, how dare you cheat on my tests?" Ice Blue Night King barked. He stood with his arms crossed over his chest, a man clad in green clothing beside him. Han's son instantly became worried, but his expression remained unchanged. "Night King, why would you say something like that? How could I have cheated?" When Ice Blue Night King saw Han's son remain so calm despite the powerful presences approaching him, he knew for sure that he had drastically misjudged Han's senator. The man really had played him. Ordinary dukes would be groveling on the floor in front of such a dangerous aura. Only someone extraordinary could have kept his cool in this situation. "If I say you were cheating, you were cheating. Even if you didn't intend to deceive the tests, I still consider you a cheater." Ice Blue Night King approached Han's son with a scary amount of power. Ice Blue Night King had led knights throughout the systems of chaos for over a century, and he had killed countless creatures in that time. He was a very scary man, and in addition to all that, he had the will of a half-deified being. Even a king would be intimidated in his presence. Han's son sighed and said, "Well, what are you going to do to me?" Although that sounded very hopeless, Ice Blue Night King knew that Han's son wasn't actually cowed. The Night King was actually quite curious about this resilience though. "Kill you." Ice Blue Night King pulled out his sword so fast. The others at the barbecue didn't even see when it cleared the sheath. Before they could blink, a blue light was coming down on Han Sen's head. The ice blue greatsword stopped 1 inch above Han Sen's hair. Han Sen didn't flinch or show the slightest change in his expression though. All he did was looked at Ice Blue Night King and Mr. White and say, "If you do not mind joining me, I can have wine and meat brought for you. Would you please accept some as an apology?" Ice Blue Night King was quite surprised, but he kept his gaze flat as he stared at Han Sr. "You didn't think I would kill you?" "No," Han Sen responded. There was something else Han Sen could have said, but didn't. Even if Ice Blue Night King wished to kill him, he wouldn't have been able to. His sword would have greeted the demon bug by Sema, not Han Sen's flesh. Ice Blue Night King glanced at Mr. White and sheathed his greatsword. He then moved to sit beside the fire. Looking interested, he asked Han Sen, "Why didn't you choose to join us Ice Blue Knights? Give me a decent reason, and I might just let you go." Han Sen sat down and began to explain the situation without hiding any details. He told the Night King about the grudge he held with Night River King, then finished with, "If I go, Night River King will do harm to my friends and family here." Ice Blue Night King laughed and said, "That is trivial. I will make a recruitment order to forcefully conscript Night River King into the Ice Blue Knights. Wouldn't it be easier to leave me? Why go to all this trouble?" Han Sun murmured, depressed. Recruiting a king to join the Ice Blue Knights was a big decision, and so Han Sun didn't understand why the man was going through all that trouble to secure one marquise. Ice Blue Night King took Han Sun's bottle of beer and had a swig. He said coldly, "The Ice Blue Knights are in charge of cleaning up a planet in the systems of chaos, but this planet has many deified xenogenics. They appeared unexpectedly, and we were short-handed on troops. If Knife hadn't sacrificed herself to buy us more time, the Ice Blue Knights would all be gone. We owe her a great deal, and so, our debt falls to depend on you. If you really want to pay her sacrifice back, then let me stay here." Han Sun really didn't want to be a part of the Ice Blue Knights. He hated the concept of being confined. The Ice Blue Knights were like a proper army, with way too many rules. Ice Blue Night King didn't answer. He cheered and tapped his drink with Mr. White. Then he looked at his empty cup and told Han Sun, "This drink is nice. You can bring more with you when we leave." Seeing Han Sun looking rather glum, Ice Blue Night King grinned. Mr. White smiled and said, "Do not worry. If Ice Blue Night King wishes to take you, he will prepare everything. Night River King will go too, and we will certainly be keeping an eye on Narrow Moon." Han Sun seriously said, "If things are like that, then I won't complain too much. But I do have one important condition. If you agree to this, then I will have no problem with coming along. If you don't agree, then I'm afraid you'll be taking me there in a body bag." "What condition is that?" Ice Blue Night King asked curiously. "I want them to come with me as part of the team. You cannot split us up, no matter what." Han Sun pointed at Han Ming'er and the others. Ice Blue Night King shook his head. "The Ice Blue Knights have rules. If they cannot pass the test, they cannot join. And if they cannot pass the test, then your conditions cannot be met. I haven't completed the test, so I'm not qualified to join. Please let me go," Han Sun said. Ice Blue Night King looked at Han Sr. "Do you know what a chance you're trying to give up? I'm aware of your difficulty. Your body and Geno arts require many resources to level up. Knife is gone, and Narrow Moon won't be giving you anything but scraps. The only chance you have is to come with me to the systems of chaos." Han Sun just stared at Ice Blue Night King without speaking. He stood by the decision he had made. Ice Blue Night King didn't want to concede. He had his rules, and Han Sun's request had been too much. The scene froze with two men unwilling to take a step back. Mr. White smiled. "The Ice Blue Knights do have rules. Han Sun's demands are too much to ask." Before Han Sun could speak, Mr. White continued, "You don't have to join the Ice Blue Knights directly, but I could use a few more guards. And my guards don't belong to the Ice Blue Knights. There aren't too many rules with me, so if you would like to, you can come along as part of my team." "Mr. White, how could you do that? Your guards are required to be king class." Ice Blue Night King exclaimed, "They're my guards, and I'm free to choose who I want, am I not?" Mr. White smiled. Han Sun looked at Ice Blue Night King, and then he looked at Mr. White. He was confused. "You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."